Good morning. I'm Ron Flagg, President of the Legal Services Corporation. I think you can tell I'm tremendously excited to be with you here today, to welcome you to this field hearing of LSC's Rural Justice Task Force. I want to thank everybody who traveled from a distance near and far to get here. We have people as far east as Burlington, Vermont, as far south as South Carolina and Georgia, as far north as Anchorage, Alaska, as far west as Hawaii. So thank you all for traveling those many miles to be here with us today. We're joined by 57 members of our task force from 28 states, and I really ask you to take a look at the roster at some point if you haven't done so already. It is tremendously impressive, and again, reflects the terrific work that Jessica and others did in assembling the group. I want to offer special thanks to our two local hosts here, our grantees, Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma and Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, both for being tremendously gracious hosts, as well as for providing such wonderful, impactful services here in Oklahoma. I also want to thank those of you from Oils and Lasso who are joining us in the audience today. Thank you. We're gathered today for no small task, that is shrinking the justice gap in rural America. And LSC created this task force really with a three-pronged strategy to try to accomplish that. One, to raise awareness of the justice gap in rural America. The justice gap in America throughout the country is accompanied by a knowledge gap of the existence of the justice gap, and that is, I think, even more daunting in rural areas. Too many Americans, and particularly Americans who happen to be in Congress, often perceive of legal aid as being something prevalent in urban areas and don't recognize the unmet legal needs of rural America and the tremendous resources even today that are being brought to bridge the barriers to providing legal services to our rural neighbors. Our second goal is to profile model legal services that are already effectively providing services across the country. And many of you here today are really, to my mind, heroes of our legal aid community in rural areas such as Alaska and Montana and Vermont and Maine and Oklahoma. And what we need to do first is to listen to what you have to tell us, and then spread the word of the innovative practices in which you're engaging. And that leads me to our third goal, which is to identify really those practices which are most effective and to share those practices with the rest of the country. Just yesterday, we were graciously hosted by our colleagues, first at Oils and at Lasso. And yesterday's conversation, certainly for me, highlighted the kind of innovative and effective practices that can help bridge this justice gap. Stephanie Hudson and her colleagues at Oils talked to us about making up the gap between the relatively few legal resources they have at Oils and the gargantuan unmet legal needs of the Indians living in Oklahoma, and how they use students educated around the state in programs both in Indian law and law in general, under the supervision of Oils lawyers, to bridge that gap in resources. When we went to Lasso, Michael Figgins and his colleagues shared their innovative approaches. Oklahoma has 77 counties, and obviously, given the size of the state and the dispersal of the population, there's no way to have an office in each of those 77 counties. But Michael and his colleagues have come up with a way of beginning to bridge that gap. LASSO has embedded staff, attorneys in 95 community partner groups. These are in addition to the 18 offices LASSO has throughout the state. 95 community partner groups such as domestic violence and homeless shelters, health clinics, schools, offices of workforce development, putting LASSO lawyers where the clients are and where they are in rural Oklahoma. So that, to my mind, not an easy task. Obviously, a lot of relationship building over a number of years, but that is a model that should be replicated in other states, and we want to use your efforts as communicators and advocates to spread those sorts of innovative ideas across the country. I find the meetings I had yesterday and being with you today tremendously energizing and inspiring. Closing the justice gap in America is going to require innovation, dedication, and leadership. And our next speaker has that in abundance. Rebecca Rapp, really, the Rural Justice Task Force was Rebecca's brainchild going back now several years. She came to us and said, this is something we really, LSC really ought to do. Rebecca serves on several LSC committees. Her day job is as general counsel and compliance officer with Ascendium Education, but her passion really is for increasing access to justice, particularly in rural America. And she was persistent and brought to us not only her own energy and innovations, but resources of her company, Ascendium Education, and her longstanding relationship with our tremendous pro bono colleagues from Quarles and Brady. Thank you, Mike and Dawn and the entire group from Quarles and Brady for your collaboration. So, Rebecca, thank you, and look forward to talking to you all over the course of the rest of the day.
Thanks, Ron. Well, my name's Rebecca Rapp. I'm General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Ascendium Education Group in Madison, Wisconsin. I also have the great privilege of being on 3 LSC board committees and co-chairing the Rural Justice Task Force with board member Father Pius Petrick. I am really thrilled to welcome you all here today. Before I talk a bit more about the day ahead, some thank yous. First off, to the law firm of Quarles and Brady for its tremendous work on the task force, and particularly to Quarles partners Fred Gantz, Sydney Farr, and Pilar Thomas, who are co-chairing working groups, along with Mike Levy, Dawn Colhart, and Jennifer Mikowski, who lead Quarles' amazing pro bono team. To the other working group co-chairs, Nicole Nelson from Alaska Legal Services Corporation, Jose Padilla from California Rural Legal Assistance, and Allison Paul from Montana Legal Services. To our incredible speakers today, including local tribal leaders Herschel Gorman and Gary Baton. To LSC's incredible team, including Jessica Wechter, Caitlin Brown, and Becky Ferdig Cohen, for their tremendous work and hours upon hours making this task force happen. I may be a co-chair, but you truly are the leaders of the task force. And finally, to all of you for being here today and sharing your time, knowledge, and experience. The Rural Justice Task Force is important, and today's field hearing is an important part of it. We all know the statistics by now. Low-income Americans in rural households did not receive any or enough legal help for 94% of their civil legal problems in the past year. They only sought help for around 1/5 of their legal problems, and 40% of them experienced at least 5 civil legal problems in the past year. And at the last field hearing, we heard about some of the people the statistics represent. And these stories, these people, are really why the statistics matter so much. In particular, we heard about how the justice gap affects Black Americans in the rural South, farm workers, and Native Americans. The stories we heard were poignant in their own right, and they're just a small sampling of the experiences from rural America's vast tapestry of people, cultures, and topographies that could have been shared. Today, we are going to explore another piece of the puzzle, ways of delivering justice in rural America, including using non-lawyers, including paralegals and legal navigators, recruiting and retaining lawyers in rural communities, and building community partnerships. MBAs and management consultants have names for such topics, things like service delivery frameworks, staffing models, and strategic alliances. Such wording may be great for a Dilbert cartoon or a Harvard Business article, and certainly the executive directors of LSC's grantees and other members of the legal aid community continuously display sophisticated business acumen as they figure out how to lead and prioritize in a world of scarce, insufficient, and uncertain resources. But the business speak does not properly capture what we're talking about here today. What we're really talking about is continual iteration and adaptation to stretch limited resources and optimally direct them. Deep respect and desire to learn from the rich customs and cultural heritages of clients and their communities, and a creative use of technology, transportation, community partnerships, and even food and swag to bridge tremendous gaps in distance and trust. Ultimately, what this is all about, and what we're really here to talk about today, is the playbook for reaching and serving people wherever they are, whoever they are, and whatever barriers they face. It's a playbook made up of determination, analytics, creativity, heart, and hope. And it's a playbook not just for rural America, but for all of America. I will spare you my singing. You should be thankful for that. But that Frank Sinatra line about the nation's largest city, New York City, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, comes to mind. May seem like an odd choice for a rural justice task force. Hear me out though. Rural America presents some of the nation's most difficult access to justice challenges given factors like distance, low population density, unreliable internet, and differences among communities. If we can figure out how to overcome these obstacles in rural America, we can learn how to close the justice gap, not just in rural America, but throughout America. And this is something we simply must do for America to have the well-functioning legal system and really live up to a promise of justice for all. So I'll end where I began by thanking you all for being here today and sharing your time and expertise with the task force. I'm looking forward to a great day and to seeing all the great things this task force does. So thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Mike Levy, partner in the health law and business law groups of Quarles and Brady, and I have the privilege to serve as the firm's national pro bono partner. Quarles is a national law firm with approximately 500 lawyers in 10 offices across the country. Our firm is committed to pro bono. In our most recently completed fiscal year, we did approximately 13,000 hours of pro bono services on behalf of survivors of domestic violence, immigrants, veterans, and the underserved community. We are also involved in several impact litigation matters and an American Bar Association death penalty representation project. Many of our attorneys are also involved in community-based organizations in the communities where we work and live. One of the pro bono efforts we are most proud of is our work on behalf of the Legal Services Corporation Rural Justice Task Force. I would like to recognize the members of our team, many of whom are here in person today, and others who are participating virtually. They include Dawn Caldart, our Director of Pro Bono, Jennifer Mahalski, the firm's Pro Bono Coordinator, our team leads for the project, Cindy Farr from our Chicago office, Fred Gantz from Madison, and Pilar Thomas from Tucson. Other members of our team include Cameron Arthur in Phoenix, Pat Bitterman in Chicago, Megan Center in Washington, Teresa DeAngelis in Washington, Brian Fulmer in Phoenix, Caitlin Feidenkevitz in Washington, Madison Hartman in Indianapolis, Jared Miller in Phoenix, Michael Mostow in Chicago, Grace Stewart in Madison, Andrew Stoker in Milwaukee, and Shaylin Veeder in Phoenix. We have been involved in the planning and the project itself over the past 18 months. And have very much appreciated the opportunity to work with the talented and dedicated LSC staff and several LSC board members as well. I'd like to personally thank Ron Flagg, John Levy, Lynn Jennings, Father Pius Petrick, Jessica Wechter, Becky Ferdig-Cohn, and Caitlin Brown. I want to specifically thank Task Force Co-Chair Rebecca Rapp for asking us to serve as pro bono legal counsel for this important project. We've also appreciated the opportunity to listen and to learn from the subject matter experts who are the members of the task force. We know this project will result in a significant report that will advance the conversation surrounding issues of access to justice in rural America and will ultimately result in action that will reduce the justice gap for rural Americans. It is fitting that we are here with you all today during National Pro Bono Week, serving as pro bono counsel for this extremely important project. We wish you all well and thank you again for the opportunity to be involved in this significant and meaningful work to address the justice gap in America.
Good morning. The land on which we're meeting today once belonged to and was inhabited by the Caddo tribes. It was then inhabited and owned by tribes such as the Creek and Muskogee tribe, the Kiowa tribes, and the Kickapoo tribes. We wish to acknowledge these peoples. We are all responsible for understanding the history of colonization and genocide of indigenous peoples and commit to learning and building relationships. My name is Stephanie Hudson. I'd like to introduce Chief Gary Batten. He is the 47th chief of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, the third largest tribe in the United States. Oklahoma is a Choctaw word meaning red people. Chief Batten was elected chief by the Choctaw people in 2014. Before that, he served as deputy chief and has served his tribe in many roles, including as deputy director of the Choctaw Nation Housing Authority and as executive director of health and chairman of the Choctaw Nation Business Committee. Chief Batten has represented the Choctaw Nation on numerous boards, including the National Budget Committee for the Indian Health Service, the National Health Service Corps of Advisory Committees, the Tribal Technical Advisory Committee for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and the Thunderbird Youth Academy Foundation Board. Chief Batten received his bachelor's degree in business administration from Southeastern State University in Durant, Oklahoma. Chief Batten's family has continually lived in the Choctaw Nation, and they own restricted Indian land inherited from his ancestors who were original Allottees. On behalf of OILS and the Legal Services Corporation, our deepest thanks to Chief Batten for joining us today. Aho and Yekoki Chokma, Chief Batten.
Well, halito and hello to everybody, and just want to say thank you so much. It's an honor to be a part of the Legal Services Corporation, and to it has been a wonderful relationship with Oklahoma Indian Legal Services to provide services to our tribal members. It's a service that is desperately needed for them, and it's been such a huge help for so many of our tribal members, and our relationship just continues to grow and to be better, to meet the needs of our people. And so I just want to say I appreciate that so very much. And just to tell you a little bit about the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma is, we are the third largest tribe. We have about 220,000 tribal members. I can remember back in 1997 that we had around 48,000 tribal members. So we have had a huge growth in the last 2 decades. And so it's been great to see the growth of not only our tribe, but many of our tribes. Our reservation, we're located in the southeastern portion of Oklahoma. So if you can imagine, Arkansas on the eastern side, Texas on the southern side, and then of course there's a river and an old trail that borders up between us and the Creek Nation on the north side, and the trail is borders us and the Chickasaw Nation to our west. And it's interesting, we have 6975, that is our main corridor that takes us through the Choctaw Nation. It's on the western side of the tribe. So as you could tell, that area, we're about an hour and a half from downtown Dallas, where Durant, where our headquarters is located. So the area is doing extremely well on the western side. As we go towards the eastern side, we have so many small communities. It's harder to get delivery of services to them, more rural, more isolated, because we have more mountains, streams. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. Of course, I live there, so I love it. And but the downside of it is it takes a lot of cost to get service delivery to them. When I say that, not just from a travel perspective, but just the growth of the economy. If you try to attract a business, it's hard to locate them in those areas. And so we even though we're doing better than we've ever done before, we still struggle with poverty in those areas. And education is always a critical piece, as well as healthcare. But we're doing all that we can to achieve that. And so, one of the things I think I wanted to just talk about just briefly was just talk about, as I mentioned earlier, just our great relationship with Oklahoma Indian Legal Services and how they have worked with our realty department here at the Choctaw Nation to help our tribal members, because our people were not familiar with probation. They're not familiar with a lot of the dealings, even fee simple property to land that's held in trust, to restricted Indian land. All that they know is that they've owned this land, just like was explained earlier. I still thank the Lord, still have ownership to my grandmother's original allotment of land. And so, but so many people has lost that through the years, and or there's so many complications because the tribal members, like I said, do not understand that. We're trying to do a better job of educating them, but also it's a family issue. And what I mean by that, so say that I think about my grandfather's property. Whenever he passed, he did not have a will. The family did not want to probate the land, because whose name would it actually go into? And the development of a trust is new to them. All those types of things is really complicated. And but with the help of the Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, now, of course, thank goodness we're past COVID. But before that, when they were unable to go to our community centers, because our people they want that one-on-one, because they're being educated. They want to feel that trust and confidence that they can have in Oklahoma Indian Legal Services to help them get to where they want to go. And as you can imagine, trust has always been an issue in regards to, especially when it comes to dealing with property, because a lot of our tribal members did lose that property. Say that they had an Indian home built, which within the Choctaw Nation, our housing authority is a state established housing authority. And so they had to take the land that was restricted out of restricted status, put into fee simple status. They paid the home off, but then they had to start paying property taxes. So we've tried to educate them about that, but people still lose their homes due to lack of paying for property taxes. They just don't get that concept. So just wanted to, that's some of the issues that we deal with. Also just I always say the crossroads, just because of mental health, and is an issue that we're dealing with. So many of our clients are dealing with that. Of course, again, when you have rural isolation, you have typically drug abuse, and then you have mental health, or you don't know it, sometimes dual diagnosis. But the more that we can try to break those barriers down, and I know it's costly, but it has to be one-on-one. It can't be done through any other type of formal training. It has to be that one-on-one training. And so with that, I just, again, want to say how much I appreciate the relationship that we've had with Oklahoma Indian Legal Services. And then also, we still have, we need representation for landlord-tenant issues. Just, again, a lot of our tribal members don't understand contracts. They believe in handshakes. And so it's hard for them to get past the old time, that the way things were done in regards to your word was your bond, and understand what they're dealing with in regards to landlord tenant contracts and so on. And of course, one of the things that we need assistance with is just contested divorces. Paternities are still going on, guardianships, adoptions And we're doing everything that we can within the Choctaw Nation to make sure that we grow those services so that we can provide that to them. Like I mentioned earlier, just the state planning, just how do they get to the point where they do not lose their property, or for a lot of times are people go into nursing homes. And so how do they try to protect the home so that it's sustained for the family, as opposed to being lost after a person maybe have failure to pay at a nursing home, and then the nursing home takes that piece of property. But anyway, I just again, I don't want to dwell on the negative so much, because this has been such a wonderful partnership, and I just appreciate Oklahoma Indian Legal Services and the partnership that we had. I cannot stress how important they are to us. And again, I truly believe that our tribal members have begun to develop that trust relationship with them, that they are seeking their guidance. And so with that, again, I just want to say Yakoki, which is a thank you just to them and for all that you are doing. And just I would leave the floor open to any questions that anybody may have of me.
To hear whether or not Native members residing on reservations are experiencing challenges off the reservation, that is with off-reservation predatory lenders preying upon people who reside on the reservation. For example, we've been seeing a challenge in Arizona with folks buying mobile homes off the reservation, bringing those mobile homes onto the reservation, but then having to deal with repossession issues. So is that happening in Oklahoma as well?
Well, it does. Again, those people, most of the time, they want to be able to have access to the property. And so that's where we're trying to do our best from a protection from our codes and our law, if you will, to make sure that that doesn't happen. But, you know, we have to do business with people. I mean, people, if they want to make a loan, there's got to be a way that they can have the ability to get the value. And so the most important part is really just education. I don't know if Oklahoma Indian Legal Services and everybody understands it. It's almost like our people have been left out of that. Again, you know, I mentioned estate planning, just land contracts, just the basic things that I think we as people that deals with contracts and so on all the time, we're used to that, but they are not. And so again, I just think anytime that they, whether purchase of a mobile home or just acquisition of a home or removing the restrictions on their property, and so they just need to know what those deliberate trade-offs are when they're facing those issues.
Chief, I was very curious about your comment of how much the population of the tribe has increased in southeast Oklahoma in that 20-year period. Could you explain why there has been such a large increase in the tribal members for your tribe?
I believe the one is I push our history and our culture. In the Choctaw Nation, we do not believe in a blood quantum requirement. I'm not a big fan of the Dawes Roll Commission. I know that that's the only thing that we have. So I've really pushed that if you're even 1/1,000,000th, that you should be proud of your history, no different than if you're Irish, if you're Hispanic. You know, be proud of where you came from and the people that's led the path before you. And so I think it's that. I do think it's also the other side of it, which I wished it wasn't, but we've been able to deliver more services than ever before. We have 147 different programs. So now we have the ability, our mission is to provide opportunities for growth and prosperity. So we have 5,000 kids per year go to higher education. We have 5,000 kids that go to career development for things such as HVAC, plumbing, all those types of things. So the opportunities are truly available to them. Of course, we provide health care throughout our reservation. And so I think it's also been that they've seen the tribes been able to rise. Of course, we have a little over, when I started in 1987, we had about 110 employees. Today, we have a little over 12,500. We have about 850 50 positions that's open right now. And so they're able to see employment opportunities. They're able to see higher education, healthcare, all those types of things. And I think so hopefully between the promotion of our history and culture and the opportunities that's available to them, that's the reason why we've seen the increase in tribal membership.
Chief Batten, thank you so much. We are truly honored to have you join us today. And you so well reminded us that those terms, access to justice, are really about securing people in their homes and securing their health and their families and their education. We're very grateful for your partnership with Oklahoma Indian Legal Services. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Yako Key. And in Choctaw, we say there is no goodbye. So we say Chipisa La Chiki, which is until we meet again. God bless you.
We're now going to transition to our first panel. We talked about innovation and leadership. I can think of no better person than William Hubbard, the Dean of the Law School at the University of South Carolina, and not just a past ABA president, but a long-serving, continuing serving leader of our bar. And so will the rest of the panel join us? And the panel is going to have a conversation, and there will be time for questions and elaborations on the deliberations of the panel after the first 15 minutes or so of their conversation.
It's a real privilege to be here. Ron, thank you for those kind words. This is very important work we're about, and I commend all of you for being here today and those of you who are online to help us devise a better way to bridge the justice gap. As we know, COVID and the eviction crisis have exacerbated the access to justice problem in our country and brought it to the attention of many people. But still, there is that information gap. There's so many people who don't realize what a big issue this is, how important it is, and how we must work harder to solve it. As I said, some people have focused on it because of COVID and the eviction crisis, but it is, as you all know, a systemic problem. Ms. Rapp gave you the data points that we most of us all know about, measuring the size of this justice gap. I'm involved with another organization, the World Justice Project, that measures the strength or weakness of the rule of law in 140 countries. And tomorrow we will release the results of the 2020 Rule of Law Index. And sadly, the United States will be ranked 115th out of 140 countries around the world on accessibility and affordability of basic legal services. So it's not just a fairness issue and a moral issue. It's a rule of law issue. If you don't have access to justice, you can't say that you stand for the rule of law. So it's important that we delve into this. We work hard about it, work hard on it, and try to come up with innovative approaches to help bridge this justice gap. I think one reason I was invited to serve on this panel, as Ron mentioned, was my involvement in the ABA and the creation of a commission on the future of legal services. And that commission was created primarily to try to bring some great minds together and some hardworking people to come up with some ways that we could try to bridge the justice gap through innovation and technology. And through that effort, we work very closely with Legal Services Corporation. I see people around the room who contributed greatly to that effort. But we did run into opposition. There's a protectionist group of lawyers around the country. Interestingly, most of the opposition to these resolutions and efforts came from the New York State Bar, the New Jersey State Bar, and the Illinois State Bar. And they were entrenched in their opposition to these resolutions that promoted innovation in the delivery of legal services. And that still is a strain of opposition that you see in the American Bar Association House of Delegates. But there is hope. Some states are experimenting. They're doing a terrific job of coming up with innovative ways to provide legal services using technology and using those who are not licensed to practice law. There's some developing case law that gives more flexibility to persons who are not licensed to practice law to provide those legal services. So today, we will hopefully provide some optimism on how to help bridge this justice gap so that we can deploy greater person power to address the issue. So I'm honored this morning to serve on this panel with such a committed group of individuals who've proven they know how to innovate and how to make greater use of non-lawyers. With me today, Nancy Iverainen, Program Director, Paralegal Studies Program, Whatcom Community College, and former chair of the Washington State Limited License Legal Technician Program. And we'll be talking a lot about that today because at one time we all thought and hoped that that was going to be the model for the rest of the country. Allison Paul, Executive Director, Montana Legal Services Association. The Honorable Kirsten Thompson, Senior Circuit Court Judge, Oregon Circuit Court, and Chair of the Paraprofessional Licensing Implementation Committee of the Oregon State Bar. And Hallie Bunger White, Dean, National Tribal Trial College, and Executive Director, Southwest Center for Law and Policy. So we have a limited time, so we'll jump right into the questions and this learning opportunity. So Allison, let's start off with some context from Montana and nationwide. Why do we even need to look beyond lawyers to help close the justice gap?
Necessity would be my answer. In some parts of the country, you can't swing, as they would say in Montana, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a lawyer. And that would be DC, right? But in Montana, there's only, for the whole state, there's 3,500 licensed lawyers. That when you do the math, when we do the math, if we look at it, there are 23 legal aid lawyers for the whole state, and we only have one program. So that's one legal aid lawyer for every 15,000 people living below the poverty line. There is zero way we're ever going to represent everybody. There's one lawyer for every 250 people above the poverty line. Our population density gives interesting statistics because there's only 6 people per square mile in Montana. And so it's a very stark idea of what rural looks like. And there just aren't enough lawyers. The majority of people in court in Montana are unrepresented in civil matters. It's just the way it is. And so we have to come up with other solutions to help people because, as we all know, it's a complicated system. And if you aren't given instructions, how do you know how to help yourself in court?
Thank you. Judge Thompson, I'm guessing from Allison's comments about the justice gap and lack of lawyers in rural America, it must mirror your experience in Oregon. So why is Oregon piloting the licensed paralegal professional program?
So in Oregon, we are in the process of starting the licensing of paralegals. And one of the issues is we haven't exactly decided what to call those licensed paralegals when the program is implemented in the end of June, 1st of July of next year. So we have the rules, we have the structure, but we're not 100% sure. We know that we don't want to call them triple LTs as Washington State did, just because of the confusion factor. The background in the program that I was fortunate to be involved in is Oregon does have a similar dynamic as Montana. We're not quite so large and not quite so spread out, but there's a huge difference between Eastern Oregon and Western Oregon, where the Willamette Valley has Portland and Salem and Eugene, and there are a fair number of legal professionals. But the vast swath of Oregon is very rural, and there are very few lawyers. Now, Oregon has a difficult time right now. We're having a really hard time having attorneys, for example, in public defense work. We have really just a dearth of attorneys in rural Oregon. So in Oregon, the Oregon State Bar had a futures task force that was appointed by the Board of Governors. They produced a report in 2017, really documenting the lack of access to justice throughout the state. And they recommended that there be licensure for paralegals in the areas of family law and landlord tenant, two really high need and high volume areas. As a judge, those were dockets that I served on many times. And before I became a judge in my practice, it was family law and also landlord tenant, going back to when I was a legal services attorney in Oregon City, Oregon in the 80s. So it's been a chronic issue, and I think the lack of attorneys has been exacerbated over the years. So I was asked to chair a committee. The Board of Governors decided to form an implementation committee in 2019. I was asked to chair that committee in 2020. I decided to accept the role, and then all of a sudden the pandemic hit. But a committee was formed. And I want to talk just a little bit about process, because I think the process was really critical to us being able to be successful in creating an implementation plan. We had a strong, focused committee, including attorneys who were specialists in the area of family law, landlord-tenant law. We had two highly experienced and committed paralegals, a representative from our Young Lawyers Division, a public member, and then we were staffed by just superb staff members from the Oregon State Bar. Then we had a ginormous advisory committee. I really mean that. We had, if people were interested, we said, hey, come to our meetings. And we met every 2 weeks by Zoom, beginning in about September 2020 through the spring of this year. And we continued to present our findings and our recommendations to the Oregon Supreme Court. I say this because there were similar kinds of comments in terms of this is not a great idea from folks within the Oregon State Bar, attorneys particularly. The experience of attorneys is often that is invisible to them, that there are many, many people who are not receiving legal services because the cases that they're involved in. So they don't see the many, many other folks who come to the courthouse on a daily basis with their landlord tenant and their family law cases, and they are never, ever able to speak to anybody, get any legal advice or guidance, other than perhaps a family court facilitation office, which is something we do in Oregon. And I think most states around the country do something similar where there's someone to help with forms, but they can't provide legal advice and direct assistance. So we threw the net wide open to get all those comments along the way and to kind of keep the doors open. It ended up being a very fruitful experience in terms of being able to get our rules drafted and have the unanimous support of the Oregon Supreme Court to license paralegals, and it will be rolling out. But it was important to have the doors wide open, to gather the statistics and keep educating the public about this and educating the bar about this. Each state does what they do in terms of legal services provision in their own unique way, and they all believe they're correct. So they probably all are, but they're all doing it in their own unique way. We have the advantage in Oregon of having requirements of liability insurance for persons who are licensed to practice law. So we have a professional liability fund that attorneys are required to participate in unless they have other proof of coverage. We had excellent support from our professional liability fund as well to reassure that trained paralegals would be able to be insured. There would be consumer protection, and we are hoping that this is going to provide greater access to middle and lower income Oregonians who at this point are just priced out of the market, particularly in family law areas. So I could go on, but I don't want to dominate a whole lot of that. But it is just, in my view, the most important thing for those who are considering something like this. Throw the doors wide open, bring in the folks who are questioning what you are doing, so that they can have their questions answered and turn into your advocates. We found that with many people who were involved in the process that we engaged in Oregon.
Judge, that's a terrific lesson on process. Can you give us, other than the risk management, can you give us just a little bit more on the core design principles? of the program itself?
So our core design principles were, and I think that you all may have on your programs. We created this little one pager. It's, was designed to be a front and back that shows what the minimum training requirements are. Essentially, the pathways to licensure for a licensed paralegal include having a paralegal studies degree, so an associate's type program in paralegal studies, 1,500 hours of supervised practice, and then 20 hours of required basic education in terms of the concepts that they will be dealing with and understanding limitations of practice, which was a very, very big concern and a realistic one for lawyers to say, so these folks are going to be licensed in limited areas. Are they going to know where the guardrails are? And that's an important part of the basic information. And then a requirement for continuing education and so forth. So that's kind of the basic pathway is that paralegal studies program, 1,500 hours of supervised service, 500 in family law, 250 in landlord tenant in order to be licensed in those areas. The other pathway in is going to be highly experienced paralegals. So my assumption is the first folks who are going to be licensed are probably those excellent paralegals that many of us have worked with as lawyers or as judges. We know these folks. They know how to do stuff. And they're already doing a lot of direct client service with some additional basic education. Again, the 20 hours of basic CLE, some competency and ethics testing, and the requirement of a character and fitness background check. These folks will be able to get licensed, be able to obtain assurance, and then be able to provide direct service to clients, whether that is through an attorney's office or as an independent practitioner. Because like Montana, there are a lot of small towns where there's no legal office, there's no law office. You go to John Day or Burns, a couple of the cities that I have served as a senior judge, a vast swath of territory. They have one judge who has two courthouses about an hour and a half apart that he goes to and from. There aren't very many legal practitioners at all. So there may be the paralegal, the licensed paralegal who has his own office or her own office and does direct client contact without having an attorney that they're directly involved with. Or they might be through an attorney's office and be that satellite office.
Thank you. Nancy, you chaired Washington State's limited license legal technicians program. The result there was not quite as successful as what we just heard described in Oregon. What was the program about and what happened?
Well, the program itself was actually pretty successful. We do have 75 licensed triple LTs, and they are providing services, many of them in rural areas, and certainly to moderate means and the working poor. That was pretty much their target population. The program started with an edict from the Supreme Court back in 2001 to the Practice of Law Board to please find some way to use non-lawyers to facilitate access to justice. And so after many years of hearing from people, working through models, talking to people in the bar, talking to educators, the Practice of Law Board came up with this concept of a legal technician. And we didn't want to call it paralegal because paralegal is many, it can be many things. And so we tried to come up with a term that reflected that there was a limited license. And finally, in 2014, the Supreme Court approved the idea of the limited license legal technician to practice in family law. And that's because 85% of the family law cases in Washington are pro se. And it's really difficult to navigate your way through those cases. And when you look at the importance, it isn't just the need. When you look at the importance, what happens to children for their next 18 years is really critical. And so the limited license folks began in family law, and that required a paralegal degree. And we followed the core curriculum of the American Bar Association for their paralegal program approval. We also added in an experience component, initially 3,000. We got it dropped down to 1,500. In addition to having the paralegal degree, people needed to take 5 credit classes. It was a 3-quarter sequence in family law. They had to pass a background check. They had to take a test that our board developed with a testing company, and they had to have a bond requirement. So it was we thought a very successful model, and we wanted to make sure that the consumers were protected, because one of the first things we heard from lawyers was, oh, these people won't know what they're doing. And so we tried to make it academically rigorous and the knowledge base robust enough that these people could provide services to pro ses. And what they do is they will help people with forms. They will provide them with legal advice. If they need to craft a parenting plan, they will get legal advice about how to do that. If they need to divide property, they get legal advice about what perhaps that would look like, and also the way that one should go about that. And what happened was, even though we initially had support of the court and even our Board of Governors, there was a changeover on the Board of Governors. The family law lawyers in particular resented this program. And so with a push from them and the Board of Governors, the Supreme Court sunset the program. But we still have 75 people who have limited licenses, and they're going to remain. And we're hoping eventually that we can unsunset it and come up with something that everybody will live with.
What's the effect on service to the rural populations and the underserved with this program being sunsetted and only 75 out in the field?
Well, we worried about that, and we specifically worked with the community colleges, because the community colleges are in those rural areas and frequently include the populations that we want to cover. And so we're still hoping that we can continue that networking through the community college paralegal programs. And we're just trying to get our folks out there as much as possible to provide those services. And we are also looking at finding some other ways to deliver those services. For example, we have in Whatcom, at Whatcom Community College, a street law program that's done in conjunction with our local pro bono program. And so the paralegal students do the intake of the client, and then they go with the client to meet with the lawyer to hear what that legal advice is for that particular person. And the pro bono program provides the coverage for malpractice, and our paralegal students do a lot of the intake, which helps with the workload. And so we can get an awful lot of clients through a 2 to 4 hour clinic.
Well, maybe in due course, when the public and the bar sees how successful these triple LTs are and they're not a threat to the legal profession, maybe the circumstances will change and the program will be revived, because it certainly has great potential. Hallie, we know that the justice gap is just as dire, if not more so, in indigenous communities, whether individuals or people seeking justice in tribal courts or state courts. You run a free educational certificate program that trains non-lawyers to provide limited representation in tribal courts, with a focus on providing services for victims of sexual assault and intimate partner violence. Who are the students pursuing certificates in tribal court legal advocacy?
Well, bonjour and good morning in Boker Tov. So I'm non-Indian and I married into the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I have 5 CPN kids and 4 CPN grandkids. And I mention this because I'm non-Indian. I've been living and working in Indian country for many decades now. And we started out originally through a grant from the American Bar Association and the United States Department of Justice at the University of Arizona, trying to train law students through a law clinic how to represent victims in Indian country and tribal courts. And we did that for many years, and it was a struggle, and we kind of flipped it. So now what we're doing is we're training Native people who are lay people at a law school how to represent their own people in their own tribal courts. And we're having much greater success doing that. So we have our ideal student is somebody who is from that community. So I would say, like, I'm also the admissions director. We're a small shop. So if I got an application from a Native woman who is a mom or a grandma, maybe she works as a victim advocate or in social services, but she has some indicia, something in her application that shows that she's a problem solver. She knows how to get things done. She knows her community. She's fully embedded in the community. She knows all of the resources that are there. That's the person that I'm going to be able to train in 6 months. My dad was a used car salesman, so I brought, some visuals with me. So that's who I can train to go in and provide the legal services that are missing in those tribal courts, because they're not leaving. They're not going anywhere. They're not just going to be there and, pay off their student loans or be a tourist having some time at Navajo Nation, right? These are people who are from there, and it's relationships. It's not transactional. It's relational. And so my students are from those communities. They stay in those communities. We give them the skill set to be able to do basic family law, protection orders, and victim rights representation. Now our funding is really limited. So in my fantasy, we can get more funding to do these other things. Like we're trying to develop a certificate for our legal, we call them legal advocates. That's the terminology that we use for our legal advocates to be able to do guardian conservator work. Or so we just kind of synthesize what are the greatest legal needs that we have in tribal courts and in Indian country, and then try to give certificates in those discrete skill sets. So right now we have about 230 graduates of the National Tribal Trial College who are licensed to practice law in tribal courts, and who provide oftentimes free legal services in those tribal courts. And the priority of service is to survivors of domestic and sexual violence, which unfortunately for our population is the vast majority of clients.
Do you have non-native participants in the program?
Yes, we do. So I'm non-Indian, but I like to think that I'm maybe bicultural after 43 years living and working in Indian country and being married in and sort of devoting my personal life and spiritual life and my professional life to working with Native people. So we do have non-natives, but we don't accept tourists. I just turned 60. And one of the things that I found in my life is that it's easier to teach people like how to change the oil in a car than it is to teach them about Native people's relationships to land, their history, their destiny, how to be a good relative. Like these are things that maybe take some people, because of who they are and their life experiences, are able to be embedded in tribal communities and have good relationships and understand that it's a different culture, it's a different way of being. I hate to be too groovy on this, but it's easier to train Native people than it is to train non-natives. So the non-natives that we have in the program are people who are either married into the tribe, or they've been working for the tribe. They're the social services director for 22 years, or they have some demonstrated relationship of cultural competency, because I only have them for 6 months. And in 6 months, it's hard for me to get the light bulb to go off into people's heads and to have them truly understand what the needs of the community are. And also to be a person that people can trust, because there's so much trauma in Indian country. And so to come in and look like me, there's just a way of being and a representation of self that will engender trust. So that's really hard to teach. So the non-natives that we have, and we do have maybe 15 to 20% of our students are non-natives, they have a demonstrated connection with the tribal community. So they have, a horse in the race, right? And they have some, their sense of self and personhood is also tied in with the work that they do.
Thank you. Allison, your organization, Montana Legal Services Association, recently started a tribal advocate incubator project to train lay advocates to represent people in tribal courts statewide. Why is a legal aid organization taking this on, and how did this project come about?
So we were fortunate to receive funding from the Legal Services Corporation under the Midwest Disaster Project, funding from the Margaret Cargill Philanthropies, which has been very, they came to us and they said, in a disaster situation, what do you need, right? And what we said was, we need people. We need trained advocates in tribal courts, because especially when COVID hit, and we have 7 reservations in Montana, and I'd say more than half of them closed their borders. And so then there's nobody to represent people in court. And tribal courts in many ways are more sophisticated than district courts, because they have their own bar association, or they have their own bar exam. And you don't have to be a lawyer in most tribal courts to take the bar, pass it, and become licensed to practice there. But we just don't have, there's no in Montana organized program. We were lucky enough actually to get one of Hallie's graduates to run our tribal advocacy incubator program, which I didn't realize until I met her. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And she's a woman from the Crow Reservation, and she's put together this wonderful program that's all on Zoom, and then some in person. We have 10 participants. And it's more than a training program. It's also a business incubator. So we are working with them for a year. We give them the basics in kind of just down and dirty law. They have to know their own tribal code, right? And then we help them practice. So we can refer clients. We mentor them as the year goes by. And then we give them a little bit of incubator starting money to buy a computer and set up their office and go from there, right? So it's a lack of people. There just were not enough tribal advocates. Most of our reservations are quite far away from any city where the lawyers live, right? And so it's just a lack of services.
Thank you. Nancy, can you talk about the importance of having a diverse paraprofessional workforce that reflects the communities served?
Well, just as mentioned, for tribal purposes, having people who are from the same background improves the understanding of some of the barriers to the justice system. For example, out in the rural areas in Washington State, even on the west side of the mountains, which you've got Seattle and Tacoma and all of those up and down the I-5 corridor, but you go inland 50 miles, for example, one of the towns that I went to do pro bono outreach, the people did not want to do anything by internet. They didn't want to talk on the phone. They needed that one-on-one, sit down and talk to me and tell me what is going on and how we can fix this. And if we don't give them access to justice, they get alienated and they get angry. And I think that having people sit down and explain to them about the justice system and how this works and how we can get the justice system to work for them really helps. And it helps that they're talking to somebody that they know or that they know knows what their life is like.
Allison, going back to Montana Legal Services, you also have a longstanding AmeriCorps program that places non-lawyer navigators in state courts and other community locations. The program is profiled in a report from the Justice Lab at Georgetown Law Center, listed in the meeting booklet we have before us. What do the navigators do on a day-to-day basis, and how do they help rural clients?
So with our AmeriCorps program is really the backbone for our court self-help centers. We don't have the infrastructure for self-help in Montana, so I got together. The court administrator is a friend of mine. We sat down over a glass of wine and said, how are we going to fix this? And decided we were going to get an AmeriCorps program and train bright, young. Most of them are young. Most of them are just out of college and they want to go to law school and they want to see what the world's like. And so they come out, they help with forms. They provide instruction. We train them on not providing legal advice because half of them work with the court system. And we have partnerships with all kinds of agencies. So any place where you have intake and referral around legal issues. Our Office of Consumer Protection has 3 of them that answer the phone, and they all make referrals with each other. We have some that do intake and intake and referral, help with, like I said, help with forms, help with instructions. And then, Montana for Housing has one. Our court ombudsman for Child and Family Services has one. And they all can make referrals to each other and become a network at a different level than you would have, because they're the ones actually talking to people, right? Than you would have if it was just the professionals up here.
But if these members of the AmeriCorps are not from rural communities, what do you do to help them adapt and be more responsive to the people they're designed to serve?
A lot of information. One of the things that we do is with both our AmeriCorps and our staff is we take them on, you have to do a rural outreach trip if you work for us. And so you literally get in the car and drive through eastern Montana, which it's a whole lot of nothing, right? With tiny towns, and you can go for miles miles and miles and miles without seeing anybody. And if you haven't ever had that experience or even been in a small town, you don't have the same sense of what the challenges are like, right? So we make them visit and not be a tourist. I like that, Hallie. We have the same issue a lot of times, but be a part of that community and see what people really experience.
And you only have them for maybe a year or two, so you have a lot of turnover. So this
we do. They're 11-month terms. So
how do you make the best use of them in that short period of time?
Training and technology. That's the answer. You do a lot of infrastructure building so they can, and they come out. I would say half of them, they all come in wanting to go to law school, and only half of them actually go.
Judge Thompson, we know that many state courts are greatly under-resourced. How will Oregon's paraprofessional program be funded and sustained?
So the design of this program is that that the people who are applying to become the licensed paralegals or whatever we call them in the long run, they will be paying fees like lawyers do. In Oregon, a new lawyer pays a lesser fee than a more experienced lawyer. So the fees will graduate up from the first year on. And that's true also to some degree for the CLE, the continuing legal education. There are almost always reduced cost initially. Our anticipation is, and many firms actually, it's interesting. There's some family law practitioners who have been very protectionist. There are a lot of family law practitioners who have said, hey, as soon as this opens up, I'm going to get my paralegals licensed who are interested as quickly as possible, because it is rather obvious that this opens an area of serving clients who otherwise were priced out of hiring the attorney, but who will be able to hire the licensed paralegal for a more limited service. So there is not a funding source from the court. It's going to be fee for services. It is not going to address everybody's needs. And that is, we know that, but it is going to create a opening in the market for middle and lower income folks who are priced out to be able to hire the licensed paralegal to provide the services they need in their cases. And those folks are going to end up paying for their program to develop over time. One of the things that we were aware of in Washington State's experience, and since they're our next door neighbor, people are always asking, we called ourselves the PLIC committee, what's going to happen to these licensed paralegals, and are they going to be self-sustaining? I think unfortunately, Washington State's program was not very expensive in terms of the costs that the bar needed to pay. But even that very minimal amount, people pushed back on it. Our Oregon State Bar president and the Board of Governors have basically said, we don't expect this program to be self-sustaining in any particular moment. There's not that specific kind of a paradigm. It will grow over time, just as young attorneys grow over time in order to give back and pay their way. Young licensed paralegals will grow over time to give back and pay their way. And existing firms, as I said, many practitioners have already just said, hey, as soon as this is available, I'm going to make sure that I can license paralegals in my office. So that's kind of the court's not going to pay for it. The people are going to end up paying, really.
Thank you. Hallie, in addition to sending staff to your training program, how else can the legal aid community help bring more legal assistance to rural tribal communities?
I like the idea of, suit up and show up, like drive your car, know who your neighbors are, go there, introduce yourself to the clerk of the court and the judge and the prosecutor, like have a personal relationship. And this comes, it's bottom up and top down. So if you're a director of a legal services program, who's in your service area? What tribes are in your service area? Go out, bring a pan of Rice Krispie treats, or, stop by and get a couple dozen donuts on your way. Show up, press some flesh, say what you're going to do what you said you're going to do, and then consistently be there and not have it just be checking a box, because people can sense that. And send your staff, especially if you have Native staff, or if you know people in your community who might be interested, send them to our free, did I say it's free program, so that they can get licensed. And then also, when I say show up, like physically show up, and then also be supportive, right? So if you've got attorneys who are pushing back about legal advocates practicing and maybe taking away some of their business, use your voice, explain how it is that Native people don't have access to justice, and how we need to have these people serve rules so that children can remain in their families and people can remain in their homes. And then also, I would say, send people to programs, learn about your tribal courts, sit on committees. If you've got interjurisdictional, cross-jurisdictional things, build bridges, because it may take a couple years, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. But if people consistently see your face and you're doing good work, which we all are, and we're there for people, then there's going to be increased access to justice. There's going to be improved relationships between tribal, state, and federal courts. Families are going to be healthier and communities are going to be safer.
All right, we want to leave a little time for Q&A. So this is directed to all of us. We'll start, Allison, with you. What's your 30-second elevator speech for why we need to look beyond lawyers to help us close the justice gap?
Mine's a 5-second. I'll say there should not be a monopoly on justice.
I like that. Judge?
So mine would just be respect the people who are already providing services. Think of the licensed paralegals or whatever they're called to come as the allied legal professionals who are providing direct services to people who need access to justice. They're like nurse practitioners.
Nancy?
The unauthorized practice of law is happening, and there are clients out there who are being victimized by people who represent themselves as independent paralegals or as being able to provide legal assistance. Frequently, these people are not just giving bad advice, they're charging more than lawyers charge for things like simple wills or filling out divorce paperwork. And if we don't get ahead of the wave by providing limited licensed professionals, we're going to get swamped by the wave. So we need to keep ahead of the wave and do this not just for access to justice, but also to keep ahead of the onslaught of the unauthorized practice of law. That's a lot of it is coming on the internet.
And we're seeing a lot of that in the immigration space, especially. Hallie.
I would say believe in the power of Native women to solve the problems within their own communities, hire them, empower them. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, good.
With this model, are there any limitations on the fee structure that the paraprofessionals can provide? And then what about limitations on incomes and assets, so that you really do make sure that you're assisting middle income and low income? I have some experience with this from the Milwaukee Justice Center, where we got pushback from the family bar that by helping people fill out forms, they weren't going to be hiring family lawyers. And of course, the statistics showed over time that that wasn't the case, and those attorneys then ended up being volunteers in the program. So I'm just wondering, what kinds of things have been done to sort of overcome those hurdles?
Okay. So the question about fee structure is, for reasons of antitrust, we can't do that in the Oregon State Bar. If the people are licensed, they get to set their fees. That said, in Oregon, the State Bar does very robust interviews and so forth to figure out what fees attorneys are charging and what they're charging for paralegals in their offices, because they're allowed to do that already for a paralegal working under the supervision of an attorney. And the stats come back that paralegals' time is usually charged at a fraction, 30 to 50% of what the attorney fee cost is. So we can't control it directly, but the evidence suggests that it's less. We have had some really fabulous triple LTs from Washington who have been super helpful in Oregon's process. Christy Carpenter, who is a triple LT from Washington, was one of our advisory group members. And in her practice, which she had from the inception of the program, she did charge a sliding scale and provided that information to us. And it was a fraction, 30 to 50% of the cost of an attorney in that area. And I think that as this rolls out, the bar is going to be trying to capture information from license holders on who their clients are. And again, informally, what we're hearing from triple LT practice is they are representing folks who would be priced out of attorneys.
Yeah, and in Montana, because our system, our tribal incubator, we also have a attorney incubator. It's because it's run by a legal aid organization. They have to, in order to participate, and we don't charge them, they have to agree to do so many hours of service to Modest Means, and they have to show a dedication to doing a Modest Means practice in a rural community. And so that is to get the benefit. And that's because we are going to make referrals, and we're referring low and moderate income people.
So one of the ways of regulating that somewhat, again, we can't set prices because it's anti-competitive, but we in our licensing regulations, we said that the legal technicians could not do quadros, a qualified domestic relations order. So no division of complicated retirement accounts. We also said that if the family home has more equity than the homestead exemption, that the legal technician could not do that kind of a division. And so you can carefully craft the ability of the limited licensed legal technician to do certain kinds of things, and that by its nature then will make them practice in the moderate means and working for and below.
And so you answered the first part around the fee structure. I'm wondering whether or not there's a expectation or requirement for pro bono work by paraprofessionals. Is that conversation happening?
Well, our Washington State Bar discussed that, and they do have an aspirational requirement, not mandatory, of 50 hours per year. Our legal technicians did way more than that just by nature of the populations that they're working with. And we were due to have the National Center for State Courts come in and do a study about the population that legal technicians were serving. And that was happening just as the program was sunset. So we're still looking at ways that we can collect data from our existing legal technicians to find out for sure what the population is that they're serving, so that we can show that it really is improving the access to justice.
So we've heard we've got a tremendous need for legal services for people in rural areas. And we've heard a wide variety of approaches, from experiential training for the AmeriCorps volunteers in Montana to actual, very structured programs, licenses. People would be able to put out a shingle and charge a fee. Do you have any advice about how to structure a program so that we can actually meet this tremendous need?
So is the question really how to take it to scale? Is that really another way of asking the question?
That's a good way to put it.
That's a hard question.
It's a hard question. I think you have to get the reason our state, you have to get people to work together. And Montana, I think similar to Alaska, is like a big small town, right? People know each other. They work together well. And you have to have everybody kind of rowing in the same lane. And that doesn't always happen with the challenges with the bar.
I do think it'll take time. And I think when people see the triple LTs are not a threat over time and the services they do provide, but it's a slog, I believe. I don't know of any magic bullet that will allow these programs, particularly because of the limitations of funds, but some others may have another idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's a magic bullet, but I do think it is the sort of thing that if we begin to think of allied legal professionals extending service in the same way that we have, allied medical professionals extend medical services. Many professions have a gradation of professional licensure, and lawyers have tended to just be, we have lawyers, and then that's kind of it. And lawyers sort of can do anything with their license, at least in Oregon. If you have a law license, you can just put your shingle out and do whatever you think you can do. It's not very well regulated in that sense. And so helping the public to understand that these allied legal professionals will be able to provide the focused service at a more reasonable cost, I think is part of the answer. Not the whole answer, but I think it's, just helping the public to understand, if I have this need, maybe I could see this kind of person. And because, again, in states like Montana, like Oregon, there really aren't that many attorneys. If you do a per capita count, there's just not enough of them to go around.
I think that's a great point. Just like in medicine, like you might want to go to a cardiothoracic surgeon or podiatrist or a phlebotomist, depending on what your needs are. And so I think that we don't make that transparent in the legal profession.
I think we're getting there. Obviously, we're getting there because we're here. But time in the law is like time in geology.
I had a logistical question and then an analysis question. The logistical question is, as I'm hearing you talk about the triple LTs and the licensed paralegals, are they meeting one-on-one, I heard that part, with clients and then training them to be pro se clients, or are they representing them in an adversarial process?
They are not representing them. We allow the triple LT to accompany their client to court, but the client is pro se when they go to court. So there's no speaking agent there by the triple LT. They can be there in court as a resource or go to settlement conferences or go to mediations, but they're there only as a resource for the pro se client.
Right. Is that true with all the programs?
Yeah. No. Our, so when you get a certificate in tribal court legal advocacy, and then there's an advanced certificate, and you're admitted to practice in tribal court, they're trained to do divorce, child custody, child support visitation, protection orders, and victim rights representation. But they have free agency if they want to investigate some other area of the law. They're able to go and do that in tribal courts. You don't have to be state barred or a graduate of a law school to practice in most tribal courts. So they have, the ability to practice poor people's law, or I guess they could do theoretically, personal injury if they wanted to with the certificate.
My second question is, you've had enough experience now to know, what do the judges think about this program? In other words, obviously all across the country, judges have been very concerned about the increase in pro se clients, and that's really clogged the courts, made life very difficult for the judicial process. So do they think this is working? I mean, from their perspective, are they like, yes, bring this into my court?
Yes, I do think that the family law judges really love this because it facilitates judicial efficiency. Even with the facilitator program, you have folks that may have limited literacy. And so being able to send these clients to a triple LT and then have the client go to court and be a participant in the legal system, it really helps speed things up.
Hi there. First of all, I want to applaud, Hallie, your work to develop local people and put them in place. And I wonder, Nancy and Judge Thompson, in your efforts, what was the success rate of bringing those graduates or those people who went through that program into rural places, or was it just low income? That's the first question. And to Judge Thompson, because there's a problem in market in rural places, which is why there's a justice gap in the first place. What's then the effort and energy? I don't see the word rural on this to ensure that works for rural, and that it's closing the rural gap.
Just because of the number of people, a lot of the triple LTs were on the west side of the mountains and in the more urban areas, but we did have people in eastern Washington, and they would cobble together a triple LT practice with working with the local pro bono bar program, as doing some administrative work there, sometimes being hired by the local legal services provider to help out. So we did get some pretty amazing, and still are getting some pretty amazing work out in the rural areas from these very, very dedicated people. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
So in our implementation committee, we had Umpqua Community College from Southern Oregon and Portland Community College, from the Portland metro area, were on our advisory group. And then all the other community colleges around the state. Umpqua and PCC are the only two that have paralegal studies programs. But their sister community colleges, which are all throughout the state, we're very aware of, and the implementation committee's work. So part of that is the community colleges are sort of natural places for people who are living local, staying local, to get training and be able to embed into the community. We're hoping that that's one way that this will make its way into the hinterlands in Oregon. And there are lots of barriers, unfortunately, between, like Washington State, the west side of the state is where most of the people are. The infrastructure is there. The eastern side of the state, it's tougher. But we did what we could, and that's a continuing conversation for the bar and for the legal community.
One question has to do with the happy medium of training. Like, for example, in Oregon, you have this paraprofessional licensing implementation. And so my question is, does that in any way limit the number of paralegals that could provide services? Because like in Wisconsin, we often have paralegals who provide services. They're not really licensed, but they do know what they're doing. And so I was curious about that, whether there is a potential to require too much training that it actually might limit the paralegals who are providing services?
So one of the things that our implementation committee did actually was we looked at the training requirements of the Triple LT program in Washington, which are fabulous, but they're pretty rigorous.
Yeah.
And that was really our education subcommittee decided that was actually too hard a standard for too many people to meet. And there are something like 20 states around the country that are working on licensure of paralegals, particularly family law is a repetitive area. So we decided that looking at these different programs that we could adopt something that was somewhat more limited in terms of the training, because that was part of the feedback that we got. Part of the reason there are so few folks that were able to obtain licensure in Washington on a rapid fire basis was it was a high bar to meet.
Then my other question picks up on something that Hallie raised, which is, isn't there a way potentially to create a win-win situation for lawyers and law firms where they have lawyers, of course, but then also have paralegals who offer services at a lower rate, just as Hallie was suggesting for the medical profession? It seems to me like it's kind of like when you go to a large supermarket. You can buy the Cadillac product, you can buy the cheaper product, depending upon what you want. Isn't that potentially a win-win situation to encourage lawyers to use, paralegals?
Yeah, I sure think so. And one of our big allies as we were taking our program to the Oregon State Bar was a 45 or 50 year member of the Oregon State Bar who'd been a family law practitioner has offices throughout the state of Oregon and including in rural areas, was basically saying, I don't know what y'all other attorneys are worried about here. We want to get our paralegals licensed because it will extend our business model and allow us to serve more people. So, yeah.
So as we're talking about this in rural communities, I had a question about business. Are we teaching some of the paralegals that are going to be maybe potentially working in rural communities how to start a business, right? And how to get malpractice insurance? Because that's kind of the question that I have, in that they might not be able to find anybody to work with if there's no attorneys in those communities. So just curious about if that's something in the curriculums or things that you guys have thought about.
So I'll just say our program, yes, because it's an incubator. So we don't teach the business. We have, we partnered with Native Development Corporations who come in and teach them how to have a business, right? And that's why we stay with them for a year. So we have mentoring, and so that there's some quality control and some help to get them up and running. But I don't know about.
Yeah. Part of our pre-licensure coursework requirements include how to establish a practice, how to run that. And part of the professional liability fund's mission to the Oregon State Bar is practice management tools, because malpractice, is often really the underlying source is just not knowing how to run your business well.
We have our core curriculum at the community colleges included some in there about office practice. And since the legal technicians are members of the bar, they have access to our law office practice management resources. And I think it was covered. And if it wasn't covered, the bar provided them with everything they needed.
We're sort of like battlefield medic training. So we're teaching people how to put tourniquets on and, doing chest compressions, the legal equivalent of that. So we do a little bit of it, but most of our legal practitioners are employed by, say, a domestic violence or sexual assault or services organization, or they're maybe attached to a prosecutor's office or a public defender's office. So they have some kind of structure. Maybe only 5% of our graduates go on to open up their own practices and have to do law management. So we could definitely suck up to Montana and figure out what y'all are doing there.
Could you guys speak to, a lot of the focus is on how it increases access to justice for clients, but I also think it creates a viable career path and opportunity for the folks who go into this. Could you speak a bit about, number one, that career path, and number two, then how it increases diversity sort of in the legal aid profession, which may attract more clients? Thank you.
I want to jump in and say that there's something about teaching people about their own laws and their own systems that empowers them so deeply. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that a huge percentage of our certificate holders go on to elected office. They become tribal chairpersons. They sit on tribal councils. They just do really spectacular leadership roles. They become tribal court judges and tribal prosecutors. So there's something about training lay people who know that there's problems in their community. They don't know how to go about solving them. You give them the tools and the skill set to be able to solve them, and then the light bulb goes off in their mind. And then they have status in their communities, and then they become the people who people turn to when they have problems, about how to keep, safety and justice and health in their communities. So yes, I think that training this, like a group of I hate to say paraprofessionals, but training this people, it opens up a career path, especially the majority of our graduates are women and single mothers, right? So it gives them a good paying job. It helps them to give back to their community. It raises their status. So I think it's win-win-win all the way around.
And I think the placement of community colleges throughout the states is really important. And it is the folks at the community colleges, they're usually members of the community, and they stay there. And so having programs at the community colleges, they're affordable, they're accessible, they're academically rigorous, and that provides good training and also some good consumer protection for those people.
So we were able to have community colleges do some survey of their current and former students about their interest in seeking licensure when the program rolls out. Very high interest. The Oregon State Bar also had a Lara Media, a research group that's an Oregon professional that surveyed a lot of clients, of prospective clients of these kind of professionals, and there was an interest in service from licensed paralegals, and also an interest in the profession in general. So that was something that we were conscious of. It provides a path to a meaningful career for folks who might not otherwise see themselves as licensed legal practitioners.
Yeah, ours is designed as a career path, so.
So Colorado is having the same question about a paraprofessional program, and we are getting that same pushback from the private bar. And I'm not sure if I'm inferring this incorrectly, but it seems like there was greater pushback with the programs launched as a statewide or metro-based program as opposed to the tribal courts. And maybe that's wrong. First of all, tell me if that's wrong. But also, I was wondering, do you think, in looking back, do you think there'd be something or an argument or less pushback from the private bar if you were to launch a paraprofessional program focused just on the rural communities?
Again, we would worry about the anti-competitive, antitrust trade regulation. And it was a limited license of the Supreme Court. And so it would be hard to do sort of those geographic restrictions.
Alaska, we had explored with the Alaska Supreme Court having the more rural, remote areas, being able to have our graduates practice just family law and protection orders in the areas where they're not perceived as competition for the local bar. But that was pre-pandemic, and we haven't followed up on that.
And I hate to say it, but some of our biggest pushback was from the rural areas in Oregon. So I don't think that was necessarily the friendliest audience to begin with. And dealing with the pushback was really answering people's questions over and over and over again, and helping them understand what we were actually trying to do.
Question for the panelists, particularly those involved in state courts, how you see the allied professionals work intersecting with efforts to simplify court processes and paperwork. She gives the example of it doesn't take a lawyer to get married, so why should it need one? Why should we need one to get a divorce?
Yeah. So that's a really tricky one. I know again in Oregon that some of the things that we've been doing in terms of trying to make forms available, make information available have helped. We also have what's called an informal domestic relations trial that is really ideal for self-represented litigants. It would be very ideal for folks who are assisted by paralegals to organize their materials and so forth. And and beyond that, I don't know I don't know how to answer that question, or if I've lost my train of thought at this point. So.
Well, Washington State has a patterns form commission, and our family law forms are all on mandatory forms. And so they're all available online on the court's website. And everything that you do in family law pretty much has a form that you need to fill out and boxes to check.
Thanks. Please join me in thanking our tremendous panel.
I want to thank everybody for being here. And I want to start by talking just a little bit about the uniqueness of rural practice. We're all here because we're interested in closing the justice gap in rural America. But one of the challenges is getting attorneys, right, to move to rural places. And so one of the things that in Montana we'll do is we'll talk about some of the opportunities. So one of our opportunities is that if you're from a big city, you have traffic. So we don't have traffic. Like we call it the half rush hour, and our half rush hour means you were 3 cars back at the light. I mean, that's really it, right? And so that's a selling point. The other thing is in Montana, if you're the only attorney in the county, you are the county attorney. It's a law. So job promotion, right? Just figure out where there's nobody. But the challenges, as we all know, are the distances in Montana, the snow. Often we have 56 counties and I think 14 judicial districts, maybe 16. I meant to look it up. But that means the judges are covering multiple counties. It means the courthouse is open maybe 1 day a week, maybe 2. Now, there's always a clerk there, but there's not a judge, and the judge's staff, they rotate, right? And sometimes it's all on Zoom. We started doing video courts years and years ago because of the distance challenges. And then there were the judges that didn't want to give up their travel claims, which was video went under. But COVID brought it back. But there are just a lot of unique things about living in a more rural area. Today, our panelists are representative of some of the more creative and different ways to address the lack of rural lawyers. We're going to talk about educating and diversifying law student and future rural practitioner populations. We're going to talk about how to attract professional talent where help is needed the most. Remember the rush half hour. And then making rural practice more successful and sustainable by providing mentoring and professional development. I'd like to introduce our panelists. On the end here, we have Ferronda Brassfield. Ferronda runs her own law office in Arkansas, and she is an alumni of the University of Arkansas Little Rock William H. Bowen School of Law Rural Practice Incubator Project. That's a big name. It is. She's finished law school in 2015 and went on to return to a rural community. She's walking the walk. That's the thing. So she's going to talk about that. I have to my immediate right, Sally Hullava. Is it Hullava? Hullava? Yes. I have a friend with a V. The state court administrator from the North Dakota Supreme Court, and she oversees North Dakota's rural attorney recruitment program. On the end is Tyre Perlman. She's a staff attorney with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, practicing in a rural community, and she co-chaired the New York State Bar's Task Force on Rural Justice. And then we have Anthony Schultz, the Associate Dean for Faculty for the Rural Law Opportunities Program at the University of Nebraska. So thank you. we're gonna start with a question. We have about 45 minutes. We're a little behind, so if I think you're going on too long, I'm gonna take Lynn's role of killjoy and pull you forward, so we can get to our questions. And I'm just gonna say this from the beginning. If you have a question when we get there, and Jessica will remind you, direct it to one person so we know who to answer. Nobody knew on the panel who you were actually asking the question of, so we all answered, which took a long time. So we're just going to try and move that part along as well to get to everybody. So my first question, if this is to Feranda and Tahir, you are both early-ish in your careers as lawyers, and you've chosen to practice in a rural area. Let's start with Tahir. Could you start by describing what your version of rural looks like?
Yeah. So full disclosure, I am actually from New York City. I grew up in the largest city in America, and I never thought that I would find myself practicing law in a rural community. I really never thought I would even leave New York City. And life just led me to upstate New York, which is tremendously rural. And what I consider rural is basically a beautiful place with less people. That's my definition of it. There's just less people around you, but they're good people, and there's a lot of incredible good work to be done. And I would say that one of the greatest rewards for me in transitioning from New York City practice to rural practice is just how very quickly you become a pillar of the community that you serve. It's a tremendous honor to have that role. You kind of get lost in the big city bustle, and it takes years for you to develop the kind of comradeship that you get with bar members, courts, and partner organizations and local people when you practice in a rural community. And the community impact of your work is so significant, and I really appreciate that about the practice.
So, Feranda, what's your version of rural?
My version of rural is much more rural than that, I think. No, I'm just joking. I graduated high school, and so I'm technically from Stuttgart, Arkansas. It's the rice and duck capital of the world. It is a town of about 9,000 people. As far as our court system, we still have a literal circuit judge that travels the circuit. So she goes from one court to the other, back and forth. And so it's a very farm town community. We have one high school in the area, and all the surrounding towns pretty much come to Stuttgart for education. It is it's very much fueled by factory industry and agriculture, and many of the industries there are fueled by agriculture. So it is a rural also means in my area not a lot of advanced education. Lots of people are working class and pretty much just working from one day to the next to try to make their ends meet and to provide necessities for their families.
In Montana, we have frontier counties, which is a real thing in the census designation, and most of our counties are considered frontier. So, Feranda, what's been the most notable hardship or benefit of your rural practice?
You know, there are a few, and that's most noted. One of them is just the lack of resources all the way around. Often, I find myself as the person that cares, the lawyer with the big heart, taking on the brunt of a lot of the lack of access issues. You know, people need somebody to take on their issue, and they may or may not be able to pay. And so that's one of the hardships there. Another hardship is it's very, I tried to live in the town that I practice, but the access to resources is just it's almost unbearable. Access to good health care. I have my mother is older and she's disabled. And so, living in that town where she could not get, the actual physical aqua therapy that she needed, or, the access to fresh food and actually, if you want to eat out, not eating something fried. And I know that sounds, it's very basic, but it's a lack of access to amenities that made it impossible for me to live there. So I commute an hour, a little over an hour to my office so that I can practice in a rural area, and I can also have a quality of life that I wouldn't be able to enjoy just living in Stuttgart.
So when I first came to Montana, I practiced in Eastern Montana and would drive the circuit, and went to Glendive and was very excited because the hotel had a tower of salad. What I didn't realize was that every salad was mayonnaise based, like every single one of them, because the truck hadn't come in with the lettuce, right? Just that it's a real thing.
It is.
Yeah. So what about you, Tayyar? What are the hardships or benefits?
Well, I already spoke a little bit about the benefit, and there's many others, but I would say that the challenge is that you're serving a community where there's a high percentage of indigent clients. When I was running the Rural Law Initiative, I did a rural practitioner survey where I surveyed upstate New York lawyers that service rural communities and got anecdotal and qualitative data about what were they really struggling. And one of them really was the indigent clients, and that there's really a lot of need and that folks aren't really able to pay for the quality legal services. And so a lot of rural practitioners do a lot of pro bono work. And unfortunately, because they're considered private practices, they're not getting subsidized or compensated for the tremendous amount of pro bono work that they do. They don't qualify for public service loan forgiveness, which I deeply believe they should be. 100%. If you're a rural practitioner, you should be getting public service loan forgiveness. And also another struggle is because you're one of the only lawyers where you live in the region, you're dealing with a high volume of cases because the need is so strong. And as a task force member, I have copies of this report, by the way, if anybody wants to take a look at it. But the data in New York State, at least, is that 74.3% of the rural attorneys that I surveyed were nearing or about to retire. That basically means that the majority of rural practitioners in New York State are about to age out of practice, and no new attorneys are coming to take over their practices. And so this crisis is really huge. And I presume that it's very similar in other jurisdictions as well. And just like the high volume of cases and the fact that there's just limited attorneys, and you can't really refer it out to somebody. And yeah, that's just like a real challenge. And just like a ratio of part of our survey did a ratio of like attorney to resident. In urban areas in New York State, per one attorney, they can cover roughly 40 residents. But in the more rural counties of New York State, one attorney covers 200 plus residents. And that ratio is a complete disbalance, which indicates the serious crisis in these communities, that there's just not enough lawyers for the need. It's kind of almost like not intuitive, because you would think, oh, there's less people, so we don't need as many lawyers, but it's actually not true. There's less people, but there's also very few lawyers to meet the need.
I've got to add something, because you made me think it's more difficult in a rural area to find support staff as well. You're likely not going to find a trained paralegal unless you poach them from the attorney up the street, or maybe they retire and they, now their paralegal is looking for a job. But, you're looking at, realistically having to find someone like a needle in a haystack and then train that person and hope that, that they stay. But as attorneys, if you've trained, someone that's never been in a law firm or practiced law, you're doing a lot of the work for them and letting them watch you work while you pay them. And so that is a challenge as well. And with the lack of resources in these small towns, you may never get paid, but you still have to pay, you've got to make sure the mortgage is paid. You've got to make sure that all of the bills are paid, your malpractice insurance, your LexisNexis, all of the costs, the phone system, whatever case management software that you're using, all of that still has to be paid regardless if your clients can pay or not. And so that's a challenge as well.
So Anthony, Nebraska's Rural Law Opportunities Program takes a creative approach to the rural lawyer shortage by cultivating prospective lawyers as undergraduate students. You make law school more accessible for students from rural Nebraska and create a pipeline of talent that will return to practice law in communities, possibly even their hometown. How do you recruit students to the program, and what supports do program participants receive as they matriculate and move on?
Sure. So I'm glad we started with the first question, which was geared at sort of what does rural look like in the place that you are, because I think that's an important part of what we're talking about. Upstate New York is different than Montana, which is different than Nebraska. And this goes to how we recruit and the sort of situation we find ourselves in. We, as a law school, partner with 3 undergraduate institutions in Nebraska, 2 state colleges, and 1 university that's part of the university system. So the University of Nebraska at Kearney is an undergraduate institution that has a number of students in a community of about 35,000 people. We also partner with Wayne State College, which is a state college that's located in a community of 5,000 people, and Chadron State College, which is another community of about 5,000 to 6,000 people. Chadron State College is farther from Lincoln, Nebraska than Fayetteville, Arkansas. And Wayne is a little bit closer to Vermilion than it is to Lincoln. So the geography of what we're dealing with is an important piece of the idea. But what we've been able to sort of divine from the existing population of lawyers in rural places is the folks that are most likely to go practice in those places are from those places. And so that gave rise to the Rural Law Opportunities Program. Now, the analogy that we've heard with the medical field today, I think in the prior panel, is relevant here as well, because in Nebraska, part of what we did to try to solve disparity in terms of medical services available in rural places was create the Rural Health Law Opportunities Program, which predates the Rural Law Opportunities Program by a couple of decades. And I actually find in the development of legal education and maybe access to justice, we are trailing the legal profession by about 20 years in a lot of different ways, whether it's professional identity development or intermediaries in terms of practice, but maybe also in programs like this. In any event, the idea is to identify students who are attending those schools, Wayne, Chadron, Kearney, who are from rural places, who are going to college in a rural place, who will be likely to relocate to a rural place after they graduate law school. But one thing so this idea was hatched by Tom Mall, who's on the task force, as well as some other folks, the dean of the law school at the time. They hatched this idea, and then they turned to me and said, well, okay, go do it, right? And so my job was to try to figure out, all right, what do we want to do with it? So the problems that I identified at the outset as things that might be difficult and ways that we could operate the program that would be helpful was to really give students in undergrad a good understanding of what practicing law was and what law school was and what practicing in a rural area would be like, so that if they did come to law school, they would know going into law school that that's where they're headed, right? So a failure for me is to have a student come to law school and not like law school, right? They should know about law school before they get there. So this pipeline program was really geared at developing students and their knowledge of a legal education throughout their undergraduate experience. So to that end, I partner with personnel at all of those undergraduate institutions to get them to the law school once once a year. They usually come to visit oral arguments by either the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals or the Nebraska Supreme Court. They sit in a law school class. They get a tour of the building. They meet students who are from where they're from their undergraduate institutions, and they develop connections with the law school over the course of 4 years of their undergraduate training. Then when they're in law school, when they come to our law school, and we've had a few that have actually gone to other law schools, which I actually don't believe that's a failure. I'd love for them to come to the University of Nebraska, and that's one benefit for us getting into this program. But if they wind up going to Gonzaga or KU or somewhere else, they're still likely to come back and practice law in these rural places, or more likely than a lot of other folks. So we've had some students go to other law schools, but many have come to our law school. And so as they're now in law school, and I'm in the 6th year of this effort, which means I'm just at the front end of having a full cohort of students coming to our law school, I provide a sort of a leadership program throughout law school, which is akin to, I think, what law schools are doing on professional identity development. We do a lot of goal setting. We do a lot of reflection, and we do a lot of work to try to figure out their path through law school that's going to equip them with the skills that they need in order to go serve in rural places, which is a set of skills that are different, I think, than some of the other folks that are going through law school. So we work to develop that. And I'm partnering with the Bar Association to also help foster mentorship as they move out into practice. And so basically this program is sort of like looking at high school graduates and trying to get them all the way to like their 2nd or 3rd year of practice. So it's a heavy lift, and that's a long-winded answer to your question.
And I think you already answered the follow-up, so I'm going to move to Sally. Okay. We've talked about pre-law and law school programs, so let's shift to recruitment of established lawyers. North Dakota's Rural Attorney Recruitment Program was inspired by a similar one in South Dakota, right? So what are the core components of the model, and how has it changed over time?
So let me start by saying North Dakota and South Dakota are like siblings. We very cooperative, but we're also very competitive. So I do have to give them due and say they had a great idea first. So the Rural Attorney Recruitment Program is modeled after what happened in South Dakota. And let me just put you just in a little bit of perspective with North Dakota's need to recruit attorneys in general, I think, but especially to rural areas. So we have 3,070 attorneys licensed in North Dakota, which sounds like a lot for a population of 780,000. Just over half of those people actually live and work in North Dakota, though. Of those attorneys that do live and work in North Dakota, 87% of them work and live in just 7 of the counties. So that leaves, 40 plus counties with no attorney at all in them. And then when you start doing the mental math and you look at what attorneys do, you start taking out attorneys who are judges, attorneys who are law clerks, attorneys who are county attorneys, attorneys who are public defenders, attorneys that work for the government in some function. And you realize very quickly that there's very, very few attorneys who can do general civil and family practice. They're just not available. And people still want to meet with and talk to an attorney when it's a personal problem. So we modeled after South Dakota. South Dakota has a program where attorneys can sign up for a 5-year program. We also have a 5-year program. South Dakota will pay them. It's 90% of 1 year of law school tuition. We kind of got away from that. We thought it was just too variable. Our legislature only meets every 2 years, and it's kind of a pain to change things with them, as I think most of you know. So we settled on $45,000. It's paid out over 5 years. The attorney commits to staying in the county or community for 5 years. Reflecting our very rural area, to qualify for this program, we need an attorney first. Second, a community. The community has to be either a county of 16,000 people or less, or a city of 5,000 or less. Again, looking at our very rural nature, that only eliminates on the county level. There are 9 counties with 16,000 or more people. On the city level, there are only 14 cities with more than 5,000 people. So it's widely available. We've just run the first recruitment. We had 3 attorneys apply. We had 2 communities apply. We did match the communities and the attorney, except for one guy who's still hanging out there. So we're hoping to do better. We're right in the middle of a recruitment now, and I have to say we started recruiting for attorneys in September. We haven't gotten any. We started recruiting for communities October 1st, and so far haven't heard from anybody, but fingers crossed.
Yeah. So, what would success look like for you in North Dakota?
Success for me would automatically be beating South Dakota. Sorry. No, success for me is getting attorneys to sign up for the program, and actually, I think a bigger part, getting the communities excited and seeing what's in it for them. I think that's going to be a big piece for us, is getting the communities to realize, even if you're not going to be a county attorney or a city prosecutor, that there's something in it for them.
So I want to hear from both Anthony and Sally on the next question. What key relationships and resources did you need to get it started and help with long-term sustainability? Why don't you go ahead and start?
So our program, not surprisingly to me, started with a judge and a county attorney up in the oil boom counties. And I think because when the oil boom hit in North Dakota, well, keep cycling through, but the last time it hit, we suddenly realized there was nobody to fill vacancies in the public defender's office. There was no one to fill vacancies in the state's attorney's office. There was no one to do family law. So that was a key partnership to start with, getting those folks interested and excited. They also worked really, really closely with our bar association, who's actively involved in funding this program. And finally, they worked very closely with the legislators who are actually attorneys. Somebody who could really understand from a practicing perspective what the deficit, what the issues are created by.
What about for your program?
So obviously the cooperation of the undergraduate schools, they're really doing the heavy lifting. So I neglected to mention that the students come through undergrad debt-free. So they have full scholarships to their undergraduate institutions. And the whole goal, one of the major goals of the program is to get them through law school with as little debt as we can possibly get them. So it's in-state students with no undergraduate debt coming to law school at a law school that is very well funded at the state level. And our costs are quite low. So we can realistically get a student through undergraduate and through law school with less than $20,000 worth of debt. And that student will have, I think, a tremendous capacity to go to a rural place and practice law. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we had graduate institutions that, to some extent, put some money into their scholarships, but also repurposed sort of existing scholarships, maybe rebranded them as going toward this sort of an effort. The law school's contribution involves, a modest payment to me, a meager payment to me. I'd lose a lot of money on this program, but in any event, so it's my time. I'm an associate dean for faculty. I teach 4 classes at the law school. My appointment is 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% service. So finding resources at a law school to do this is not an easy lift. But I was willing to do it because I'm from Elwood, Nebraska, a town of 650 people, and I think this is important. So that was an important contribution. The Bar Association, an important contribution, leadership of Tom, and then Sam and Liz, and then I think a broader support within our community. The question starts with institutions, but I always come back to it's Tom and it's Sam and it's Liz and it's me and it's Chuck and it's Kate and it's Brian and it's Richard, and we're the ones who made it happen, right? So I think that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. It's always people who just will take the reins and make it work. And I think we're on the road to doing that. So partnership, but more money would sure help.
So Ferhunda, you graduated from the University of Arkansas Little Rock Law School, Rural Practice Incubator Project. I got it better this time. Which was designed to prepare you to practice law in a rural area. What support was offered through the incubator project that you wouldn't have received as a solo practitioner otherwise?
Sure. So I was the inaugural class of our incubator. And so it was just getting started. There was some very valuable support that was provided. We received a $2,000 stipend you're just getting started. $2,000 goes a pretty long way with setting up services and paying for some of those initial costs. We had a boot camp that just was a crash course on all of the things that you need to know if you're going to be a practicing attorney anywhere, especially in a rural practice. One of the things was a requirement that you have to have malpractice insurance. And I was like, what is malpractice insurance again? So that would not have been on my radar had I not participated in the incubator. We received Lexis for 1 year. We received a subscription to Clio for 1 year. There were the local bar associations donated a year of CLE. So I was able to sit in on classes and really just learn all of the things that I didn't know and that I didn't know that I didn't know. But prior to my participation in the actual incubator, my law school provided a number of pathways for me to just kind of figure out what rural practice was, what it was like, what the challenges were. One of those programs was I was able to participate in a Shepherd's Consortium on Poverty. And it's with my law school, the Euler Law School was a partner. And we went to Washington and Lee University for a seminar at the beginning of the summer. And then we did a download at the end of the summer there in Virginia. I was placed in the Legal Aid of Arkansas in Helena, Arkansas. Lee Richardson is back there. Lee, you probably don't remember me, but I worked for you for a summer, right after my first year of law school. So I was in one of the poorest areas of the country, just watching the managing attorney, who was Faye Reed at the time, watching her as she almost single-handedly, took on these cases at Legal Aid, and to see what the needs were, and to see the just stark poverty and how that affected so many of the legal needs that people had there. I also had the opportunity to participate in as a Findler Fellow. So for 2 years, I worked with Arkansas Access to Justice to work on some of these issues, to research and to help develop ways that the state and Arkansas Access to Justice, Legal Aid of Arkansas, the other groups that were partnering, how we could help self-represented litigants. And we were able to do a rule change that allowed unbundling of services in Arkansas. And so those were some of the, just prior to graduating law school, those were some of the supports that my law school provided so that I could be immersed in the issues of rural practice, and the issues that poverty, the ways that poverty affect the legal needs of the citizens of Arkansas.
So what improvements would you want to see in the program?
I would absolutely like to see the program like a track program, more than 1 year. I don't think that I absolutely believe that I could still benefit from some support from the law school. There was that 1 year of assistance, and then after that, you're pretty much on your own. I would also absolutely love to see some loan forgiveness. I still have loans, and one of the things that just being a do-gooder, and as I look around the room, I see so many do-gooders in the room. And when you really care about an issue, often you are the one that has to bear the brunt of the issue. And I think that with rural practitioners, that our law schools, our state legislatures, could do much more to alleviate some of those issues. I think that poverty is subsidized by the government in so many other ways. But the legal issues are kind of left to the people that really care. And so I think that extending the program for more than 1 year, I would say probably 5 years, it takes at least that to get your feet under you and to really get your business where you need it to be. And I think that, having more of a connected mentorship that's there, somebody that I don't want to bug, you don't want to bother people, you calling them all the time. But if you don't know, having that person or a group of people that you can call on consistently as many times as you need to while you're trying to figure it out. Because in rural areas, one day I might be doing family law. The next day someone needs probate, and the next day someone's got a criminal law issue. And so it's very difficult to be focused on one area of law when there's only 9,000 people in the town and people need everything.
Yeah. So Tahir, what would you add to Faranda's list that would make it easier for people to practice?
Yeah, Veranda, you really covered a lot in your remarks, and they definitely corroborate the research that I've done with the rural bar in New York State. I think a big complaint that came out of my own research was that there's real professional isolationism. And that takes a psychological toll, and it also takes a toll on, practicing, because you're doing it on your own. Faranda touched on it, the difficulties of recruiting paralegals and support staff. Like there's just a labor shortage, and you end up being the one doing it all. And that leads to just a lot of stress. And in our own Rural Justice Task Force in New York State, we recommended a number of interventions that can provide more support to the rural bar. New York State is very urban centric. Our bar is very urban centric, and it took a lot of advocacy on our part as members of our task force to convince the urban practitioners of the need and like the support that is required here, and that this is a responsibility for the entire state bar. It's not, you operate in an urban center where there's plenty of lawyers, plenty of people you can hire, amazing broadband, but you just are totally clueless and don't seem to care about the needs of the rural practitioners. And doing advocacy around that has been challenging, but also really rewarding, because once you educate people about it, they're like, oh wow, this is like a big issue for everybody, and we do need to take responsibility. I did just want to state that again, I can't stress, like in my rural practitioner surveys, the attorneys would write back, I had a wonderful law school intern, and it was great to work with them, but they can't come work with me after law school because they can't afford, like with the lower salary and their student loan debt. So there was a lot of comments like that, which to me indicated that part of this problem is that you get lower salaries in rural communities, and it's hard to balance that with the student loan debt you carry. I also will say that I think where law schools can do better, because most law schools are urban centric, I think the experience of the rural law schools that are really creating a pipeline and educating and exposing their student body to rural practice opportunities is incredible. And I think that law schools can do that more. I remember our career development center when I worked at Albany Law School had all these panels where they would invite practitioners to come and talk. And they never had any panel on rural practice. And I self-organized it and invited the rural practitioners I knew through my network running the Rural Law Initiative to come and talk. And it actually brought in a surprising crowd, surprising for the Career Development Center, not surprising for me, but it brought in roughly 45 students at Albany Law School that were all coming from rural communities in New York State. And we're so excited to be on a panel where they can talk to rural practitioners and learn about the opportunities they had there. That kind of mentorship, I think, is so crucial. And there needs to be more of it. And also the graying bar. You know, we had our survey indicated that there's a lot of seasoned veteran attorneys in rural practice that are going to be retiring soon. Many of them work way past when they wanted to retire because they're the only person in town and too many people rely on them. Like some of the respondents wrote back, I'm the only lawyer in town and I'm 65 years old, but I can't retire yet because too many people rely on me. And these people are willing to pass down their practices. They built amazing practices, have great community goodwill. Why not connect them to new attorneys or to new lawyers that are trying to move to rural communities? Creating some sort of connection in a formal way, I think, would be really meaningful and help bridge that gap.
Yeah. So in one of the reasons I'm moderating this panel is that Montana Legal Services runs a rural incubator project for attorneys. You heard me talk about the tribal one. Our state bar is very under-resourced, and we didn't really have a modest means panel in the state. And so Montana Legal Services decided we would create one. And so we worked with the bar, with our Justice Foundation, and started an incubator project. We designed a boot camp that we gave to our bar. We designed all the training for it. Now our bar puts it on, so it looks like it's theirs, but they give us all the money from the CLE, which goes back into the program, right? We do mentoring and networking with our attorneys and rural practitioners, right? That you have to commit to serving a rural area. We learned early on, we don't require people to live in the rural area. It didn't work, but they have to serve it either by travel or by phone or by video or something. You got to provide services in a rural area. We provide malpractice insurance for the cases we refer. They have to have their own for the rest of it. But it's 2 years of, monthly meetings with attorneys, people you can call, and it creates their own network. So they have a network among themselves. They know who to refer to. They know who to call when they have questions. And it's been really nice. And it gives our staff more resources. Now they pay. They do have to do so many pro bono hours, but they also do modest means. They have to do a certain percentage of their practice. They do get some loan forgiveness from us. That's where the money comes back into the program to go back out. If you agree to do this, we'll help you with loan repayment.
And Allison, I think Tyre made a fantastic comment about the mentorship and partnering with people that want to retire. Yep. Because that's one of the things that really has catapulted my business is that I guess it was fate. And the judge he had been the judge in the area for so long. I had never met him. But he sat special for my judge in juvenile court one day. And he said, hey, Miss Brassfield, you've got to come down to Stuttgart and see me. I've got an office for you. And he really did have an office for me. And so I rented it for a very low money for some time. And then I was able to purchase that building from him. I didn't have to buy desks. I didn't have to buy a copy machine. I didn't have to buy chairs. I just walked into a law practice. That doesn't happen for everyone. I also walked into I'm a landlord now. And so one of my tenants is the public defender. And so so I was able to walk into that. And so I really think that connecting with older attorneys and people that want to retire and that can help you transition into the business is a fantastic way to get a good start.
So here's your final question. Like in Jeopardy. Who or what has a role to play in recruitment and retention of lawyers to close the rural justice gap? What haven't we talked about? Tyre?
In closing the justice gap, I really do I really do think that it requires multiple things happening at the same time. I don't think there's one hack that is going to work on this, but I think the important thing is to make sure that a new generation of lawyers is going to be in rural communities to support. And I think that there aren't enough pipelines set up. I think there are, like what Sally's doing and what Anthony's doing is incredible. And I think we need more of that, and make sure that like law schools take on the responsibility to educate their students of the rural practice opportunities, because they're tremendous and they're incredibly rewarding. And I don't think most law schools prioritize that. There's no internal strategic discussion about how are we going to make sure that we're like shifting the legal training paradigm away from like big law, urban centric places to rural places, which are incredible opportunities that people don't know about. I also think debt relief for rural practitioners is absolutely fundamental. I cannot stress enough how so many people are deterred from rural practice because they just feel too overwhelmed by their law school debt. And I think that expanding rural broadband, because that is one of the unique practice challenges, the broadband issues are really serious. And I think that expanding rural broadband to make rural practice easier, and for example, instead of driving to court, you could do a virtual appearance, or making sure that your clients also have access to broadband so that they can appear virtually, will make a huge difference. And also bringing in urban practitioners to do legal services in rural areas using the technologies that unfortunately don't exist in most places in America because the infrastructure is just not there.
Sally? I'm going to give you a very practical answer. I think there are two areas that really should step up a little bit more. One is your state legislature. They have an absolute interest in keeping every part of the state economically viable. It's a good investment. Investing in people is a good investment. And getting them to go back to rural areas helps keep it vital. The other place I would say is your Department of Commerce, or your whatever your tourism department is running under. Because we know from North Dakota's experience that a lot of the folks that actually move to North Dakota are returning midlife, or they're coming back later to take care of parents or something. But doing some more active recruitment to get those folks to think about North Dakota always says, come to the good life, and maybe come back to the good life would be a good slogan for this one.
What about Anthony?
So, I mean, we all we're lawyers who've operated in a legal system, and we have a really hard time thinking of justice as involving anything other than lawyers and the law. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case in many rural places, right? So, what levers are there to pull that can increase, justice outcomes, whatever we mean by that don't necessarily involve lawyers and the law? That's sort of a big philosophical question and the opposite of practical advice. But, practically speaking, I do think that, we have to think about what we're trying to do here. I mean, if we're just trying to maintain existing capacity in a system that's never met the needs of certain populations, then I'm not sure that that's the thing that we should be doing, right? If we're trying to actually enhance access to legal tools for achieving justice for populations that have never had access to them, whether it's because of poverty or discrimination or whatever, then we've got a much heavier lift, I think, on our hands. And it's not necessarily going to be solved by having more lawyers. We're going to have to fundamentally change institutions. So I wonder about that. The other thing, so I've heard a lot about debt relief. I sort of hate leveraging debt into outcomes, right? So, hey, here's a nice carrot for you because we've put you in a very difficult position by requiring that you finance your education by borrowing money. And so I think that there's a larger policy question there about, do we want to finance higher education, whatever that looks like, whether it's community college or 4-year undergraduate degree followed by 3 years of graduate school education, which is that's not inevitable either, right? Do we want to fund that through debt? Does that give us a lever that we're going to pull to try to get people to rural places when they wouldn't otherwise want to go there? And what do we think the sustainability of that really is? So more, I think, public investment in education, because I work for a public law school and I have my priors too. So thank you.
Rhonda?
I think that it's going to take a commitment from all of the players in the legal community to make this more sustainable, to make legal practice more sustainable. During the pandemic, we went to virtual court, which is something that everybody said that we could not do. We cannot have virtual hearings. We can't have people appearing via video. And we did it. It worked. A lot of my clients didn't have to take off work for a whole day so that they could sit in the courtroom and wait on their case to be called. They could sit at their desk, or they could maybe take a break and go out to their car. They could they could do their whatever hearing before the court, and then they could go about their day. They didn't have to lose wages for a whole day. A lot of that is being scaled back as we are opening up, and we just have to we have to think outside the box and not be so committed to how we've always done things, and consider how we can make this more sustainable for the rural practitioners that are taking cases, and the clients that are in dire need of these legal services and the relief that they need from the courts.
Yes, this question's for Anthony. How many students have gone through your program?
All right. So we've had, from UNK, for example, that's the Kearney School. We've had 30 students who have been in the RLAP program over the course of the last 5 years. 21 of them are in the program now, right? So we have to always think about we brought in students 4 years ago into that program. 8 out of 9 came to law school. They met so we have certain entry marks in order to get there. So they have to hit a particular LSAT level and have a particular GPA in order to gain sort of like automatic entry into the law school. So 8 out of 9 came to law school. Most of them are in their first year of law school right now. Chadron State College has had 27 students that have been in the program. We got 5 out of 13 graduates who came to our law school. 3 other graduates went to other law schools. We had some students that chose not to go to law school, which I think is actually a healthy outcome for the program. And then we did have some that didn't achieve the marks that we needed them to achieve. And we do assist them in achieving those marks. So we give them an LSAT prep course. We have them run through one course that's free, and then we'll invest in another course if they haven't met the mark. And we try to provide as much guidance on the LSAT as we can. But we in some instances have students that just don't meet the entry criteria, and we can't change those, right? Or at least we haven't been able to so far. So we've got 4 students from Chadron who are currently in law school, and who will be moving on here in the next couple of years. And then Wayne State College, we yielded 4 out of 14 graduates of 34 total students. 20 are in the program now. 2 are in law school at this point, and 2 have graduated. So we've only had 3 students graduate from law school in the 6th year of the program's existence. One of those is actually none of them are practicing in rural areas yet. And I say yet because I really do believe that the ability to go and do rural practice in many instances is going to really settle in that 5 to 7 year mark out of law school, when you worked in a firm in maybe a more urban area, gained a lot of experience, and are at a place where take the family and go back home, right, and invest there. So they haven't gotten there yet. I have high hopes that they will, but that's where we are so far. Really small numbers, and a lot of time.
I don't have a question. I have a comment that I want to share with everyone. Recruitment and retention are very important issues. And in that light, I want to share with everyone that about 2 years ago, I was asked to do a program to introduce students to the law field at my alma mater, Fort Valley State University. And as I was preparing for that presentation, I reviewed the ABA membership profile data. And about 2 years ago, when I looked at that data, the data showed that only 4.7% of all attorneys are Black. And that really resonated with me. In addition to, getting students interested in law school and recruiting students, I was amazed that the data showed that the number of African American Black attorneys is declined over the last 10 years from about 5% to 4.7%. So in that light, when I saw that data, as I mentioned, it resonated with me. So for the past 2 years, I've continued to do workshops at historically Black colleges and universities in Georgia. I've called the program the Roadmap to Law School Project. And when I do that Roadmap to Law School Project, in addition to introducing students to the legal profession, I also talk with them about practicing law with legal services agencies and practicing law in rural areas. The workshop, it has 3 components. Again, we talk with students about, what is required for admissions to law school. We have students talk with we have law students to talk with the college students about what the law school environment is like. And then we also have career professionals to talk with the students about various career fields. But I just wanted to mention to, this group that in addition to focusing on recruitment and retention of attorneys, that we also need to look closely also at what are ways that we can use to attract more Black lawyers into the legal field and attract more Black lawyers to work with legal services programs in rural areas. And one additional point that I want to mention is Georgia Legal Services, Anthony, we started a pipeline project similar to what you mentioned. We partnered with North Carolina Central University School of Law, which is an HBCU, historically Black college, university law school. And every year we bring aboard one intern who's a rising third-year student. And when the student is in his or her third year, we offer that student an opportunity for employment with Georgia Legal Services program. The emphasis is that during that summer, those students, they get a chance to see what kind of work we do. And we also expose them to practicing in our rural areas. We take them down to some of our rural offices during that internship so that they can have firsthand experience in what we're doing in those rural areas. And then again, the internship leads directly to a job offer to the intern if he or she does a good job during the summer.
My question's for Anthony also. And let me see if I can put this succinctly. Do you ever wonder that if by encouraging small town kids to get a law degree, that you're just giving them another opportunity to leave the small town?
How are you going to keep them down on the farm, right? Once they've seen the lights of the big city.
I've been thinking about that song all morning.
Yeah. So my brother went to law school. It's one of the only instances in which we think we've had siblings on both sides of the podium. My younger brother's 10 years younger than me, and I taught him in class, and he didn't go back home. I didn't go back home. We're both from a town of 650 people. He's got Bridal. He works for a grain trading company called Gavilon as in-house counsel. He's looking at a job maybe in Denmark, that sort of stuff. It's this profession can change the trajectory of one's life, and we've sold it that way for decades, and that's one of the big benefits of it, right? So I don't know to what extent we are sort of working against our own ambitions through the program. My goal is to make sure that students see the value in practicing in a rural place and hopefully develop that as a definition of success for them. I push throughout the entire program that lawyers are leaders, but lawyers are fundamentally helpers. And that if they want to serve in a community, that their hometown or a place something like it would be a great opportunity to live a fulfilling life. And at the end of the day, that I think is probably what's going to get them there, right? If they see that as a place where they can lead a fulfilling professional life and help other people. But if they're in it to, if they want to make partner and bill 3,000 hours and bring home $3 million a year as part of their partnership cut at a place like Jones Day. They're not going to do it in Elwood, Nebraska. That's for sure.
Wait, and I also just wanted to add, not to underestimate the people growing up in urban areas moving to rural areas to practice there, which is definitely does happen. I'm a case study in that. And also in my rural practitioner survey, there were a lot of attorneys that wrote about, I practiced law in New York City for 5 years. And then when I started a family, me and we moved upstate. And I can say that it's been the most rewarding part of my legal career. Like, we had a lot of commentary like that. And that's also like a feeder population. You don't have to be from a small town to want to be in a small town.
And I'm from a small town, and I've lived in Los Angeles. I've lived in Hollywood. I've lived in New York City, and done some of the big town things. But with the pipelines and the pathways that were provided for me, I did go back home, and it was because there was a road home for me, and I did have the desire. So I think that some people, once they can see the big city lights and still go back to the farm.
And I just add, so I tend to think that the rural urban distinction gets overplayed, and its relevance sometimes gets overstated. And so, we all have these idea of what's rural. And that's why I liked how this panel started with what's rural look like to you, because I think it's different things in different places. But I always joke that the town I live in Lincoln is smaller than the town I grew up in Elwood, because the community I interact with on a daily basis is much smaller than the community I interacted with on a daily basis in a town of 650 people. So I think the idea of rural and small communities is really hard to understand when we really get down to it. And I use that to try to talk to students about what they want to do with their professional careers. Like, what is their foundation? What's their goal? If they want to help people in a place achieve their goals, they can do that in a rural place and lead a really fulfilling career. But I'm really trying to help them find meaning. And those that find meaning in rural places, I think, will wind up there.
Join me in thanking Veranda, Anthony, Allison, Sally, and Tyre.
I'm Nicole Nelson, and I'm the Executive Director of Alaska Legal Services. And our program is a statewide program. And for those of you who haven't heard this before, again, Alaska is this huge, enormous state that is bigger than the next 3 states combined. So California, Texas, and Montana. And we have very low population density. We have 13 offices across the state right now, and they're in our bigger hub communities. But only 4 of those offices are road connected, which means in all other communities, people need to fly into those communities. And one of the things I'm real proud of in the last year is that even though we face, like every other legal aid organization that I know, we're turning away more people than we want to all the time, we were able to serve folks in over 212 communities in Alaska in the last year. 90% of those were not road connected. They're in small villages. And I'm really proud of that fact. And another fact that I'm really proud of is that in 2017, when our community, with the guidance of our Supreme Court, came together to do an asset mapping exercise to understand our justice landscape, they found out that Alaska Legal Services was the most referred to legal entity in the state. We were more referred to than the court system, than the police, than anyone else. If people had a legal problem, they came to us first. And this makes me really proud. But of course, we're not able to reach the populations that we want to, or the people that we are able to. But while I take such great pride in our ability to get services out to far-flung places, I know that we don't do it alone. It's not alone. It's through partnerships. And that's the way that Alaska Legal Services has been doing its work since we opened our doors in 1967. And it's been sort of the bread and butter of our work since the time when Justice Bolger was part of our organization. And so today, what we're going to talk about is with a number of other folks about community partnerships and why they're important in rural service delivery, and also why they're
to put it frankly, quite natural there. I think that there's something in our remote communities where we understand that we cannot exist on our own interests alone, and that these community partnerships are born out of that. And I will say, before we start talking about with our esteemed panelists, that one of the things that when I talked about Alaska Legal Services statewide footprint of 13 offices, I want to point out that it was diminished in 1996 when there was a great loss of funding for legal services programs, and we had to retrench our footprint, and we're limited to about 5 offices. But over the course of the last 15, 20 years, we were able to regrow that and regain our statewide footprint simply because of the partnerships we had from the communities that had relied on us and us relying on them. So we began to embed our attorneys in organizations, in the tribally operated nonprofits, in domestic violence shelters, within the tribally operated healthcare system. And again, those partnerships sustain us much in the way that we're helping the communities there too. So I'm really excited to be leading this conversation today, and talking with my fellow panelists about the great work that they're doing and how they are building and sustaining the partnerships within their communities, which I think is essential, absolutely essential to rural service delivery. And so to get started, I am joined today. I want to mention that Rudy Sanchez, who is my colleague from DNA Legal Services, who is on Navajo, was unable to, his flight got canceled coming out of Dallas. So I miss Rudy, and I'm sending him love wherever he's at. And we are joined by Jen Cuesta from Rural Pro Bono Program Attorney at Colorado Legal Services. We have Krista Higgins, who is the Director of Advancement at the Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. Helen Graytel, who is the Director of Beyond Opioids Project at the Center for Arkansas Legal Services, and Kate White, who is an Access to Services Manager at the Legal Aid of West Virginia. And I'm going to, I think we will just start at this end of the panel with Kate, and have each of you just give a brief overview of your rural community and let us know a little bit about the geographic region that you're serving, what your partnership looks like, and what you're trying to solve with that partnership.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So West Virginia is a state of about 1.8 million people, and it is very, very mountainous. We are the mountain state. And so our largest city has under 50,000 people. So we are a very rural state. And the project that I'm talking about is our Lawyer in the School program. And we actually started that program in a more urban setting in Charleston, West Virginia, actually thanks to LSC and a Pro Bono Innovation Fund grant. But have expanded that program out to rural areas. We're in 7 counties, and we partner with public school systems. Usually we start with the school and then work with the county school system, which is how our schools are organized in West Virginia, to offer in-person clinics and or referrals for their staff to help families that are navigating civil legal issues. And I think the reason that we sought schools out for partnership is that around 2016 or 2017, there was a lot of attention about trauma in kids and schools and teachers not knowing what to do and how to handle situations. And there were a number of programs that were popping up in our schools to help kids, to help families. And, it felt like some of the issues that were being raised around homelessness, around domestic violence, were very much things that we as civil legal aid lawyers know how to handle. But in a lot of the counties and places where we work, with the schools we work, they didn't really know about legal aid or what we can do or how those issues might impact their families. And so it was a way to meet families where they are, meet them. We're mostly in elementary schools, and that's a place where there's a lot of parent engagement. So it's one to meet families in a place where they know. And we often target schools where there are a number of other services like healthcare services, health centers, mental health counseling, but also to let school staff know about what legal aid does and who we are and actually how those issues can impact their students. As you can imagine, you get evicted, probably not going to have your homework done when you go to school the next day. Or if you're facing domestic violence in your household, you're not going to maybe be able to focus or might fall asleep during school. And so we were able to start in that way and then really work with the schools and build out from there and work with the partners that are in schools. A lot of the nonprofits and social services that were part of those school hubs are also big referrers for families to us.
Great. That's a fantastic program. hearing about that. Jen, can you tell us a little bit about yours?
So I work with Colorado Legal Services. Like Alaska, we're a statewide program. So we have 13 offices, 11 of which are in non-metropolitan communities. And for that reason, in 2015, CLS applied for the first year of the Pro Bono Innovation Fund grant, and we got it. And the goal of that grant was to create 5 rural clinics that use metropolitan attorneys and technology to bridge the geographic gap to bolster our capacity with our rural offices. And so I was hired to do that and just that overarching goal, and approached it also using asset mapping. I think it's a really great bottom up program development tool that also really creates a lot of natural partnerships. And in that process, though, I did recognize there were a couple communities that shared 2 characteristics. And it was that there were communities that were a little more isolated and so would really benefit from having a physical location in the communities to go to where they could access legal services. And that would increase the likelihood of them accessing those legal services. And also they were still slightly big enough that we could reasonably expect people to be able to access a library without having to drive too far. And so we recognized that in 3 of our communities. And so then we started looking for that brick and mortar partner, and our natural partner was libraries. I know that's something that probably doesn't come as a surprise to many of you. Libraries are a phenomenal partner, and 3 big reasons I think of. Is first that the resources they already have available that are funded. They have a space. A lot of them have a little study room, so you have a way to provide confidentiality. They have staff. They have, and also tech. A lot of places, the library is a very volatile place for community Wi-Fi in communities that otherwise don't have that infrastructure. And also staff. And there's also huge mission alignment. Like, librarians want to bring knowledge to the community, and they know legal knowledge is lacking. So if you step in and say, hey, we can provide that knowledge, if you help us facilitate it. We've had one library say no to us, but otherwise every single other one has. And that was kind of a pretentious ski library, like ski town library. So, but otherwise they want a partner. They know this is a knowledge that is needed by their community. So that mission alignment really helps and creates buy-in. And then also, because sustainability is always a question. Libraries are paid for. There are community resources that exist there. The staff is paid for, the space is built. So if you can just build on that infrastructure, it's a little easier to think about the financial sustainability of those models in the long run as well. And in the end too, it gave us, as a nonprofit that is trying to cover a massive amount of space, another physical touch point for some of these communities we're having trouble reaching. And so for a lot of those clinics, we may have someone come in and it may be a quick advice thing, but we also can use those clinics to identify people that need larger services from our other regional offices too, and reach out to them through that way. So in the end, yeah, it's worked really well. They've been wonderful partners, and it allowed us to serve those communities that really did benefit more from having a physical space in the community.
That's fantastic. I think I like this idea that the concept of natural allies, and then also making sure that you're asset mapping. So we understand what what resources are available, who has them. And I do think that especially in rural communities, the infrastructure is so thin oftentimes. Figuring out where you can share, who already has what you need, and not duplicating those efforts is so important. Okay, let's hear over here. Let's see. Helen, would you like to go first?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Helen Grittil, Director of Beyond Opioids in a statewide project in the state of Arkansas. And our project is about serving families and individuals who have been impacted by the opioid crisis and other substance use disorder. We started this project probably circa 2017. It wasn't solely focused on people with substance use disorder. At that time, I was an AmeriCorps volunteer for Legal Aid of Arkansas, and their leadership was in the midst of thinking of different ways of approaching their client population from a reactive approach to a proactive approach. So we started looking at data, at statistical data that indicates what makes an individual at high risks to be legal aid clients. And it all came down to adverse childhood experiences. At that time, Arkansas ranked second in the nation when it comes to ACEs score, with about 25% of its children exposed to toxic stress. And that means that they are likely to be our legal aid clients, chronic disease, and things of that nature. So at that time, we took advantage of a funding opportunity of $25,000 through the Children's Hospitals to start Legal Aid of Arkansas's ACEs program. And that ACEs program basically prioritizes families with children ages 0 to 5. And then the next year, I was in a different role as a development director, and a funding opportunity came from HRSA, which is the Health Resources and Service Administration. And they're giving out $200,000 for organizations wanting to bring resources to rural communities that are impacted by the opioid crisis. And so we took advantage of that, and we are so proud to say that we are the first and probably the only law firm that has received that rural health funding. So with that $200,000 for 1 year, what we did is we did a needs assessment, and it led to us to expand our priorities to provide services that we didn't used to, like driver's license reinstatement. More important, what we did is to use that $200,000 to do internal buy-in. There's a lot of pushback when we started to ask our staff to work with that population, right? The common response is, we're already doing God's work. Now you want us to do more, right? But the truth is that whether or not our clients self-identify as people with substance use disorder, these are the clients we are already serving. And then the second part of that is getting community buy-in. And we were able to successfully do that by launching a symposium that was very well attended at that point. So that was in 2019. And then the next year, there was another funding opportunity from the planning grant to then implementation. Now it's $1 million for over the course of 3 years. So we said, well, let's go for it, right? So we went for it, and then we doubled down. We said, why don't we invite Center for Arkansas Legal Services, the other legal aid program in Arkansas, so that we will have statewide coverage. At first they were hesitant, but then they joined us, and I work for them now, and we got $2 million to start this project. And so here we are. Since we launched September 1st, 2020, and since then we have done, they ask us, what are the wins for the project? The number one win is the cultural shift, right? We are traditionally helping. In the past, we have used substance use disorder as a weapon on behalf of our clients. We are part of that punitive culture that punishes people who have that disease. Not anymore. We are their allies and we're their leaders, and we back that up through this funding. We have 4 fully dedicated staff attorneys for our SUD population. We do have an open position if anyone is looking for a job and wants to join our team. And then we have 1 full-time paralegal, and then a project director and another support staff. And in addition to that, to serve the people that are coming to us, all hands are on deck. Every case handler in CALS and Legal Aid of Arkansas help with this project. And since we started in the last 2 years, we have helped about 3,000 cases in a short amount of time. And the last part of it is that what is the biggest win is that we have enabled to access those clients in rural communities. We needed to gain community trust, and we were able to gain that by going to where they are, going to rural communities and letting people open their doors to us. So we were able to do that. And more importantly, of course, is being here to have the platform to inspire and empower every legal aid program tuning in the region and in the nation to start their own Beyond Opioids project.
It's inspiring. It's really inspiring. And I think a couple of things you touched on, which I really like about your project and sort of resonates, I think, with rural service delivery, is one, making sure that you're trusted allies, right? And I think Haley mentioned this before, that show up and suit up, being there, the consistent presence, and knowing that you can rely on folks, and also the holistic service delivery piece of this as well. It's really hard to, I think, particularly in remote communities, if you're not going to address all of the problems. You can't just say you're going to help somebody with one thing and then turn them away for the rest and build that trust. Okay, Krista, so tell us about your project.
I would love to. Again, I'm Krista Figgins. I'm with Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. And we have been doing faith-based outreach, especially in rural parts of Oklahoma, really pretty much since 2017. We are a statewide program, and we have 77 counties in Oklahoma, and 60 of those counties are considered to be rural by the Office of Management and Budget and the USDA. So there's a large rural population. There's about 4 million people in Oklahoma. A little under 600,000 of those people live below the poverty level. 12% of Oklahoma adults are functionally illiterate. You are much more likely, the poverty rate amongst non-college educated people in Oklahoma is 27.2%. So it's a very poor state, 8th poorest in the country, and very, very rural. And the issue we have 18 offices around the state. They're geographically, located to try to reach as many areas as we can. The issue really becomes, I work in disaster response. And if you are trying to go into a rural community to help those folks and you don't have an office in that community, they don't know you. You can't do like peanuts and put up, the lawyers in 5 cents and sit up a card table in the corner in, Elk City, Oklahoma, because nobody's going to come talk to you because they don't know you. They don't trust you. I've sat in meetings in rural Oklahoma where a gentleman stood up and said, we don't want the city and the city doesn't want us. And the city is Oklahoma City. Everybody who doesn't live in Oklahoma City calls Oklahoma City the city, like there's only one, but there are more. But that's kind of the attitude. We don't need folks from the city coming out here and telling us how to, live our lives. So with disaster in Oklahoma, we've had 9 federally declared disasters in the last 10 years. We've had 25 disaster events since 2013, defining that as being an event that requires resources from outside of the community to recover. So we have a lot of practice dealing with disaster here. Oklahoma VOAD, voluntary organizations active in disaster. If you are not familiar with your state VOAD, where you are, I would love to help you get familiar with them, because that is the group that is kind of the membership organization for all of the nonprofits and other entities that respond in times of disaster in your state. And it's there to really avoid duplication of benefits. The VOAD will usually set up what's called a multi-agency resource center, a MARC, in a community after a disaster has hit, assuming that the VOAD agencies that are involved actually have resources to put into that community. So we had a tornado hit in Elk City, Oklahoma in 2017. Elk City was locked down. There were police, barricades everywhere. You had to go to the mayor's office to get a permit to go into the city. And they really just weren't letting anybody in who wasn't really kind of a first responder agency. Well, Legal Aid's not a first responder agency. We are not lights and sirens. We don't go in on the backs of the fire trucks, although I wish we could to get ahead of the fraudulent contractors, but that's a whole nother story. But you get access generally, if you're not a first responder agency, through a multi-agency resource center that your VOAD sets up, or through a disaster recovery center if FEMA is involved, because it's a large enough scale disaster event. If you don't have that, you really don't have a way to access those people. There's not a venue that's a trusted space where they know, oh, the Red Cross is at the door. We're safe if we come in here and we can talk to these folks. If you don't have that, you're going to really have a hard time getting into that community to help them, because they don't know you, they don't trust you, and everybody doesn't like lawyers anyway. So it's kind of a problem. So in Elk City in 2017, I was kind of scratching my head about how to get there. I've never seen a disaster survivor who does not have a legal problem. I've been doing this for 10 years, and they usually have more than one. It's like an onion. You peel it, and there's always, another layer. So I knew there were people there who had problems, but how were we going to get in there? And the chair of the Oklahoma VOAD Emotional and Spiritual Care Committee, Reverend Mary Goodrow Hughes, she's been nationally involved in disaster response for over 25 years with MCOR, and worked the Murrah bombing here in Oklahoma and Hurricane Katrina, and helped write the guidelines for National VOAD Emotional and Spiritual Care. She's my really my therapist as far as disaster response is concerned. We talked through a lot of issues, and I said, I really don't know how I'm going to get into this community, Mary. And she said, well, I'm meeting with the Ministerial Alliance tomorrow, and you're going to come with me. And I thought, why did I never think of that? I mean, it was the biggest light bulb moment I've ever had, and it wasn't my moment, it was hers. You know, she was the one who suggested it. So Mary took me, and we went in, and I met with 9 ministers that day, and I took them all of our disaster flyers, had long conversations with them. They were able to take those flyers back to their congregations and distribute them. You know, it was every large faith community in the area was represented, and they were thrilled to get this information because they had been getting questions that they didn't know how to answer, and they didn't know who to refer people to. So that was kind of the impetus of us then going on to further talk about how to do faith-based outreach in Oklahoma, because it was very effective in that instance and has been ever since. Shortly after that, we were able to apply for one of the Midwest Legal Disaster Project grants through Cargill and through LSC. And we were able to write that into the grant, our faith-based outreach. And we are continuing to put that into grants to be funded because it's just a really excellent way to do outreach in Oklahoma. And there are lots of reasons why that is, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But and who is really served by this? The rural Oklahomans who need help. You know, we have an incredibly high incidence of disaster, and we have a very large rural population. So it's not a question of if you're going to get hit by a tornado or a flood or straight line winds. It's a question of when it's going to happen. So whoever we can get this information to before the bad thing happens to help them be more resilient, you know, that's the whole point, you know, is to help people recover faster and better and be more resilient to the bad thing in the first place.
That's a great point. And I think that's, you know, this idea of going where people are at already and tapping into the trusted resources that exist really resonates with me. I feel like, you know, trying to figure out in our communities when we're trying to figure out how we're going to serve people. For us, we're trying to find those places, that sort of the linchpins of the community that people are already going to seek help from, and then trying to upscale them and give them the tools that they need to screen and surface the unmet legal needs that we know people might have, but they aren't identifying as such. And I think, Krista, that yours is such a good example of going where people are and trying to work with the trusted resources within the community already to figure out how you're going to connect those to a greater web of services. So for Helen and Kate, you both have partnerships that are with public agencies. And so that's a little different from those of us who are in a legal aid office. So can you tell me a little bit about how your collaboration formed? I think we've heard a little bit how they formed and why, but if how do those differ from the work of a legal aid organization? And tell us a little bit more about that. And Kate,
sure. Yeah. I think one of the initial barriers we had in going into school is that in some of the counties where we are, the county school systems and the schools only see our staff, legal aid staff, on special education or IEP cases. So we have a unit of attorneys who help families through that system. And although, you hope it's not completely adversarial, there can be times where the school can interpret it that way and have to provide services. So one of the ways that we handled that was we said, our organization does that work. We have this, group of advocates that's very skilled at that. If a family were to come to our Learn the School staff, the staff that are in the school or the staff that, get the referrals from your school, we won't handle those ourselves. We'll let the family know that there are other folks in our organization and other organizations that provide those services. And the schools seem to really understand that and be okay with that. And so that kind of removed one of the initial barriers for them. We also had some, thoughts and concerns about maybe a parent hadn't had a great experience in school when they were a kid. Or we get a lot of kinship caregivers, grandparents, family members who are afraid if they come to the school and say, I'm caring for my grandchild, but I don't have legal custody of him or her, that the Child Protective Services might be called or that they might somehow get in trouble. And so we really worked with the schools and the staff and the families to identify, one, what we do is confidential. we're not going to tell the school necessarily what's going on. And we have different reporting requirements and rules about those kind of things than the school might have. But also, I think it was our constant presence in the school and working with the leadership in a school, whether that's the principal who knows every kid, the school nurse who's really dynamic and connects kids to services, the social worker, whoever it was, that person, there's at least one in a lot of schools. We really worked with them on the ground level to say, look, we're here to help. We're not here to hurt. We want to get families information. We want to get them services. And so the way we really go about doing that is we're there on a very regular basis for our clinics. We're there weekly, generally, and some we're monthly in our rural areas. We tend to go every other week. But we are also at every family event. So there's a trunk or treat, we're there. If there's a family engagement opportunity where the families come in for an award ceremony, we're there. If there are mentorship programs with, outside people coming in, we're one of them. We read to the students. One of our schools, the kids call us their lawyer. But the point is, those trust issues that can be there in rural communities around school, we wanted to overcome them by just saying, look, we're here. We're not some kind of presence that's just going to come in and be here for a year and leave. We are a part of your school. We're here to help. And not all families want to meet at the school, and that's okay. We accommodate, we work with them. But I'll tell you, if you give the family an opportunity in a rural area to meet 5 or 10 minutes from where they live, or to travel 2 counties over to where our local legal aid office is, guess where they're going to pick? They're going to pick the school they know. They're going to pick the place in their community. And in a lot of rural areas, where is the community come together? On Friday night at a high school football game, or it's at a school. And so, again, I think, there are trust issues to overcome in terms of working with schools and educating them about the differences in terms of the things that we can do and can't do. But also working with the families to really, on a ground level, get them to trust us. And it takes time, and it's hard in rural areas, and COVID did not help.
Yeah, true. So true. And Helen, you have a bunch of different partners. Sometimes you're adversarial with. How do you handle that?
So it's a long-winded answer. So I'm gonna have at it. So before this project started, we did have existing litigation against the Department of Health Services, right? As it stands, one of our biggest partner right now is one of their, sub-departments, the Child Welfare Agency. And how that came about is basically leveraging existing resources with LSC's Equal Justice Work Program on rural summer legal corps, right? So we had the first summer of the project, we selected one uprising 2L, I believe. Her name is Addie Martin, and she happened to be a social worker for 3 years with DCFS before she went to law school. And she said, in the 3 years that I was working there, I did not know about legal aid and the services that you guys provide, which is odd because we've been here for over 50 years. But I think that's a common tale from people in the field. So she said, why don't we build that partnership? So we built on her relationship that she has developed over those 3 years. And we started with a small area with DCFS. And we went from there to having constant meetings with the head of DCFS. Those lawsuits would be mentioned a little bit, like, please don't sue my boss. She's very nice. But the thing about partnerships is like, it's fertilizer, right? One partnership gives birth to another partnership. So then they led us to being partners with Parent Council. And recently we just presented to them at a state conference. And we now have keys to the kingdom and have direct access to all Parent Council in the state of Arkansas. Same with community corrections agencies. We started off with them. We just basically said, who in the community serves the community that we serve? We want to partner with you. Yes, we want to partner with you. That gave way for our partnership with drug courts and specialty courts. So the short of the long is that the way you overcome the adversarial positions that we had before this project started is that you build a lot of other positive things where you could have a commonality. So right now, instead of us, an organization or one of our organizations in adversarial position with DHS, we are actually partners. So our focus more is on the positive than those issues.
Well, those are really good points. It sounds like just making sure you put the bonus points in your piggy bank for the relationship, yes. Right? We need to do that with our partnerships as well. And Jen, you touched on before we were talking, as you were building your program, you talked a little bit about the asset mapping that you did, or that was a part of choosing where you would where, how you chose the sites where you located your libraries. Can you just explain a little bit about what asset mapping meant to you? And then also maybe tell us a little bit about how you adjusted during COVID when you weren't physically able to be where you needed to be.
Yeah. Like I said, we've kind of been hinting at it. Asset mapping is a program development policy or just approach. And it really asks you to approach a community and focus first on its assets before we look at its deficits, which it's hard with rural communities. The words, sparse or sparseness has been thrown out a lot, and there's just not a lot there, but there is stuff there. And kind of acknowledging that and approaching a community from that position as opposed to focusing on its deficits. And so you're really in that process, and it can look different for different organizations and different programs you're trying to develop, but you're just trying to get an understanding of what exists there. And that, an asset can be a physical, like an infrastructure thing, but it can also be relational, and it can also be organizational. And so for us, I had two different phases of it. The first was more research, just where were our greatest deficits between our eligible community members and the number of attorneys we had. And then from that, physically went to 5 different communities for a number of days and sat and just listened to people. I think a number of people have hinted at this, like when you're from the city, the last thing you want to do is go in and be like, let me help you solve your problem. Let me give you your solution. Because you're going to get shut down real quick.
You will clear a room.
Exactly. Yeah, they're going to be like, who are you? Please leave. And so this process allows you, I went in and I just set up interviews with anywhere from 6 to 8 people in the community, within the legal community. I asked the same questions, but I came in without an agenda. I didn't have an idea to sell them on. And I just listened to them, and always starting with the question, what are your assets? What is working really well? And then eventually moving on to, okay, where are the gaps? Because you need to know that. But, and then you can take that knowledge, and from that, the models just came. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating when you pool that community knowledge, how it was clear what tech would work where and what we needed to focus on with legal issues from the communities. And I will say, just logistically, it's really nice because it guarantees your solutions. If by the time you get to the solutions, you know what is there, you're going to build on that. Like you said, you're building on the infrastructure that's there. You're also avoiding duplication because you know what's there. And for partnership building, it was incredible because once again, I was approaching these communities before I had a solution, and I was listening. And it built dialogue, it built trust, and also going there was huge. Driving there and taking the time to meet people in their community was very important. And then it also, when I did end up with a solution, it represented what they'd told me. So buy-in was really easy too. Because I was like, look, you told me this on this date. And then look at this, it's responding to that. And people got it. They felt like they were a part of the development of that program for their community based on their experience. So it really helped with buy-in. And then in terms of just, we recognized, obviously libraries as partners in some of our clinics. And then when COVID hit, because COVID, it's the worst. So all those libraries shut down, just like everyone did. And so those clinics stopped. And a lot of them, we haven't been able to start them back up because kind of what happened is it snowballed. The library shut down, and so they started letting go of staff, and their hours got more limited. And then they've had trouble building up that support and infrastructure again. But with that said, they remained partners. And one thing we did learn from the process is the models that came from the asset mapping were distinct to each community, which meant, for certain communities, especially the frontier communities, like Allison had mentioned before, getting to a library is not a feasible thing. They are not populated enough. So we utilize the most readily available technology, which is phones. Everyone can mostly get to a phone in Colorado. And so the same month that our library clinic shut down, we were able to go to one of our other clinics, the Call for All, which is done in partnership with a firm in Denver, and say, hey, could we add 6 more counties? And they're like, yeah. And so we didn't have a county because of the diversity of tech that we had used we didn't have a county that didn't have a clinic for even 1 month because that diversity allowed us to shift. And it also made us recognize there's kind of two different clinic models. There's a replicable one, which has its value because it has a physical place in the community. But if you want to replicate it, you need to rebuild that whole infrastructure. So it's harder to replicate. And then there's an expandable model where you create a centralized infrastructure that can more readily expand quickly. And so I think the diversity both in tech, but as well as those different models, which I hadn't even realized we'd done just because I was following the asset mapping, really saved us during COVID. And those library partners, while we haven't been able to get the libraries up and going, everyone is game for it. Like everyone wants to. I'm continuing to just keep up that communication with those partners and touch base. And they're letting me know what's happening with their staffing, and I'm letting us know what's happening with, or them know what's happening with recruitment. And so I think even in a time like COVID, which is mass chaos, with partners, it is so important to just touch base sometimes, even if there's not really a tangible change to what's happening, but just letting them be like, hey, I know you're still out there. I haven't forgotten you. And so that's kind of what we learned.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the example of sort of the belt and suspenders type of like back up what you're doing and flexibility in the service areas. And it seems to me it's really based on this relationship building too and partnerships. So you can sustain some flexibility within your partnerships. As long as you keep that relationship solid, the methods can change. One thing that also resonated with me, I remembered I was trying to do a gap analysis at some point with one of our communities, and I heard somebody say to somebody else, thank goodness, just when people were asking about what they didn't have, somebody said, one of the community members, like, we don't need you to tell us the things we don't have. We already know those. So really starting from that space of pointing out the many benefits and the great things in our remote communities, I think is really important. Krista, I'd like to get back to you for a minute if we could. And I know that you spoke about the partnerships that you have with faith-based communities. Are you doing disaster work in other partnerships?
Definitely. Again, with Oklahoma BOAD, we work.
Could you tell us what BOAD is again?
Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. Every state has one. Some are more active than others. But National BOAD, the members of that are, the Salvation Army, Red Cross, Feeding America, the big nonprofits that really do a lot of disaster work around the country and around the world. In Oklahoma, members of Oklahoma BOAD, it's going to be State Emergency Management. We work with them quite a bit. FEMA is a partner. We work with them quite a bit. Lots of government agencies. Faith-based organizations are the backbone of disaster recovery, period, in Oklahoma and everywhere else. So the vast majority of them are going to be faith-based, but there are many that are not. The food pantries, we work with them during disaster. And again, the big case management agencies that we work with are going to be Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul, the Lutherans. It's a lot of faith-based, but a lot of government as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Helen, so your project has many different partners across the state. When you're rolling it out to when you're expanding, how are you making sure that you maintain fidelity to the program program goals once you've established a new relationship?
So any partner that has access to the clients we're trying to serve is a good partner for us, right? It doesn't matter if we differ on different positions. For example, our funder, one of the core activities that we must perform under the $2 million grant is to expand the access to medication-assisted treatment for people with opioid use disorder. Now, this is a bit controversial with faith-based organizations. There are different paths to recovery, and our faith-based organizations are critical resources for our client population. Most of these facilities have an explicit ban on federally approved drugs to treat opioid use disorder. So that's sort of where we have an impasse. The way we navigate that is we have an open dialogue with our with our project officers, our funders, and tell them about these challenges. So we kind of get a blessing to basically say, you can't win it all, but you keep that door open and make the changes that you can in areas in which you agree, and then use that as an opportunity to educate when they are willing and able to do so.
Okay, so this will be our last question for everyone. Do you have an example, and we can start? I don't know. I'll let someone decide who wants to start first. Do you have an example of a partnership failure or sort of a fall forward? So something that happened that was not, that you didn't think was, it didn't go the way it was supposed to at the time, but you ended up learning from it, and that you would like to share with folks as an opportunity to sort of fail forward.
Sorry. Sure.
Good.
So we got a grant in 2020 to expand Lawyer in the School. And obviously we weren't in schools at that point. And so we were very eager, and this was in a really rural county. And so finally, by the time the fall of 2021 came around, we realized we were going to be able to go back in schools in person, right? So we go to the teacher staff meeting before school starts, and we're really excited to tell them about this program. And we go in just like, we're here, and here are all the things we can do to help your families. And it was totally blank stares from all of the staff. And I think what we kind of got some feedback afterwards, and we didn't get referrals, and it took us a really long time to figure out what was going on. But basically they were like, what are you doing here and why? We're just getting back to school. We're just getting all our kids back in person. Who are you? What are you trying to help? We're dealing with all these mental health issues with kids. We're dealing with kids that are behind and, all of these things. And so what we really learned, and we went back, and we brought donuts this time. But we also said, hey, we want to hear from you. Now that you have kids back, what are you seeing? What are you hearing about what's going on, from their families or from them? And so then we heard, we're actually seeing a lot of kids and families that are having homeless issues, that are couch surfing or having trouble paying their rent, or we've seen a rise in domestic violence situations, So we kind of heard them and we're like, hey, those are things we can help with. So we're hearing these are things that you're hearing and that you need. So this helps us to be able to kind of target some of the outreach we do with families and the information we put out. But also we can help. You don't have to handle this. You can refer this to us, and this is something we can do. So I think we've all said it, but it's that value of really listening to what your partner's goals are and what they're trying to do, and then figuring out asset-wise how you can come together and meet it. But if you just go in, and we were so excited and ready to go, and that just doesn't necessarily work all the time, especially in communities that have unique needs. Yeah,
that's true. So in that same community where the posh ski library told us we couldn't have our clinic, we had to find an alternative partner. And on paper, that library looked perfect. The libraries had been really successful in the past, but it taught me a lesson of listen to people when they say they don't want a partner too, of that's okay. And then listen to the people that do. Because from that, we actually developed and kind of were able to build in a relationship with a really great victims advocate at the sheriff's office, which wouldn't have been my natural partner in my mind due to just some feelings around police and law enforcement within our communities that we're serving sometimes. But this individual happened to be in the courthouse, so people weren't having to go to the sheriff's office, and was a wonderful advocate and was willing to take on the role and provide the space. So I think listen to the people too. Listen when someone says they don't want a partner, and be open to people who do, if they come in it generally with openness and with willingness to help.
That's great. I would say, we've heard a lot today about remote, access and being able, working through COVID to reach people remotely. And I think that's great. I would just say a cautionary tale, I think in this state at least, is there are a lot of people who think that you are not respecting them if you don't come to their town. Mm-hmm. They want you to come to them. And it's a respect thing. It's a dignity thing. They want you to go, there. And we developed a training for working with Reverend Hughes and her nonprofit, Crisis Care Ministries. She's an ordained Methodist minister as well. And she's been helping set us up with all of these faith leaders all over Oklahoma. With research from the Pew Religious Landscape Study. And if you've never checked that out for your own state, it's very interesting. But when we started doing these trainings, there were folks who were, didn't want to do it remotely. They wanted you to come to them. And not everybody thought COVID was a thing. So, there were folks who didn't feel that that was a deterrent for you to come talk to them in person. So, so there's always that, but that training that we developed, there were times when we had to go do it in person.
So for us, one of our main partnerships is with medical providers for people with opioid use disorder, and the top doctor is one of the people who refer clients to us. And he referred a client to us, and we ended up giving them advice. And the advice letter said something along the lines of, "We cannot represent you in this custody matter because you are still in treatment." It really got him so mad. And he is the top doctor in Arkansas with the biggest, big organization. And he basically said, "We will never work with you again." And of course, this happens when I'm on vacation. So I come back and I try to do some damage control. And the first thing we did is to acknowledge that, we are a work in progress. There's still a lot of this that we need to learn. And part of that is the stigmatizing language that we use in our practice that we are not aware. Would you kindly come to our staff and explain that to us so we can do better? And then in the same time, we also said, and in addition to that, it's not just the fact that the person is in treatment, it's the fact that they don't have stable housing, they don't have a job, and there's a lot of legal factors that go into a judge's decision. So we make a case acceptance level of service decision based on the likelihood of the outcome. However, we can do better if we work together, and that the relationship turned around. He is on my speed dial and I am on his, and everything as well.
Krista, I have a question for you, and it has to do with one thing I see is you're the director. It's going to all be kind of the same question. You're the director of mission advancement, but it also seems like what you primarily deal with is disaster response. So I always think of disaster response more being that FEMA comes in to deal with the situation, help people get housing and so on. What kind of legal needs are there for people immediately when disaster response is involved?
That is a very good question, and that's part of what we train our faith leaders on when we meet with them, is why nobody intuitively thinks, "Oh, there's been a tornado, let's call the lawyers." Like, no one thinks that. So, and when we first started doing this, like, the Red Cross didn't think that. I mean, there were a lot of other nonprofits that had never really worked with legal aid before and didn't really realize why legal aid should be there. So there's that. With disaster response, you're looking at landlord-tenant problems almost immediately. The first case that walked into our office in 2013 after the EF5 tornado was a family law issue. It was an emergency custody modification. A parent didn't like their child being in a shelter and wanted to, switch custody. Contractor fraud, huge problem. Granny's house is a big problem. Stephanie was talking earlier about, the probate issues. And I thank heaven every day for Stephanie Hudson in Oklahoma Indian Legal Services and her staff, because when you apply for FEMA, if you don't own the house, you're not going to get any help. You have to be the record owner of the house. So we have a lot of generational housing ownership in Oklahoma, right? Granny lived there. Granny passed away. Your mom was her only heir. Now mom lives there. Mom passes away. Now you're the only legal heir, but you don't own the house. And so you apply to FEMA. Well, it's going to take us 8 to 10 to 3 months, 8 to 10 weeks to 3 months to fix that. And while we're doing that, the black mold's growing up your walls. That's going to really significantly, put back your ability to recover. And we see that all the time. And let's see, lost documents. Tornadoes and floods, no shocker, are very effective at removing your checkbooks and throwing them 70 miles away, and your driver's license. And we've seen that happen as well. So it's a whole panoply of things. And FEMA doesn't respond to every disaster. Let me answer that part of your question. You have low attention disasters or things that don't impact enough people, or they impact an area where the insured rate is so high. FEMA doesn't need to come in there and help those folks. So you don't always have them.
So I do agree that working with other organizations on the ground is such a godsend. I experienced it when running the Rural Law Initiative. I had all these satellite offices in rural counties, and it was all through partner organizations that cared about the work that I did and just let me use a room in their offices. And it's just like brilliant to work with organizations on the ground that are already there assisting, and they're also mission aligned because they deeply care about the rural communities that you're trying to serve as well. My question as the foundation is how do you what is there any sort of formal way that you establish those relationships, and how do you keep them sustainable? And this is really just a general question for all of you, because for me, it was very ad hoc. Like I just did outreach and I presented my pitch, and I had a unique arrangement with every organization I worked with. Some of them required a memorandum of understanding. Some of them required a signing of a contract. Some of it was like grant partnership, so that we would like outsource some of the work and give them some of the funding from the grants that were funding my work. Like how do you manage all that, particularly when you're like covering so many different communities?
Yeah, well, for ours, we have, many different partnerships, and we rely on all of the above, as you've mentioned. So we have contracts that support our medical legal partnerships. We have more informal memorandum of understanding that, sometimes talk about referrals and shared office space. And then there are sometimes partnerships on grants. So we will trade off between different community partners about who will apply for a competitive grant. And some, federal funding grants, you can only get it for a certain number of terms. So we can alternate who's going to be the lead. So I think, my experience has been those partnerships take a wide range of things. And it's really trying to figure out what the infrastructure is and how, do they in that asset mapping to see what makes the most sense and maintaining some flexibility in those areas.
So for us, in addition to those traditional formal tools of maintaining or creating partnerships, we built a two-way referral system. Essentially, that is in addition to the standard helpline of the two legal aid programs that power the project, we created a special line just for the people we're trying to serve, and a special online form for people to basically just want to refer their clients to us. So it's very low key, no big commitment for people who don't want to go through that MOU route or just formal partnerships. That our partnership is built on us helping their clients and our clients having access to their services.
And the only thing I would say following up on that is that the paperwork is not the hard part. The hard part is developing the relationship first. And if you start out, I think with the paperwork, you're probably not going to get very far. That would be, yeah.
Other questions? Anthony.
Yeah, Chris, I was wondering if you ran into the same trust challenges with the first responder community. And if so, how did you deal with it?
Again, just time and pressure. That's, you just keep showing up. We recently met in Des Moines, some of the Cargill grantees, and Josh Gall from Legal Aid in Iowa. He just kept saying that. He said, that's how you do it. You just keep showing up and you do what you say you're going to do, as somebody else mentioned, earlier, and you show them how helpful what you do is. And if you can help them achieve better outcomes for the clients they're already working with, they're coming to find you. Mm-hmm. Once they realized how important legal aid was to someone's recovery and how not having it could really, sabotage someone's recovery, they were all about, us being there. And we've been very, very fortunate. The disaster community is very close here, and we work together really well, now. But at first, everybody, again, was like, why are the lawyers here? Who needs these people? But you had to explain to them why. And we did case management trainings. issue spotting trainings for case managers and presentations to the disaster community, whatever we could do, to just let people know we're here to help. Here's how we can help. Here's how we can help you achieve better outcomes for your folks as well.
We have time for a final question or two. Pilar.
So maybe following up on the same question Judge Bolger had a couple of panels ago, how do we nationalize this? This, keep reinventing the wheel every state at a time is a bit of a challenge, right? It's a massive barrier. A lot of work you guys are putting into it, and it's hopefully it's very successful. It'll be more successful. Is there some way to nationalize this approach with either national organizations like the American Red Cross? I know they've got, offices in every state, but at that national level, is there a model that we could support from the LSC, again, national level, to make your life a little bit easier, and or to make folks who want to try and replicate this across their state a little bit easier? So in addition to sharing these best practices, creating maybe a slightly different umbrella model to work within. So any thoughts on that, or what would be a challenge with that from a barrier standpoint, or what would be a downside to that? I mean, we don't want to parachute in, but if we can provide you with tools or other folks with tools, then that might be another way to help replicate this a lot faster.
I mean, I can start. I'm not aware of any other faith-based outreach efforts. If there are, I would love to, to talk to them and work with them. But again, that Pew Religious Landscape Study, when you look at faith in Oklahoma, it's like 89% of Oklahomans believe in God. 82% of Oklahomans attend church weekly or biweekly. It's a very, very high percentage of folks who are involved in the faith community here. People are going to go, from the research we've done that Reverend Hughes has done, folks are going to go to their friends and family first when they have a problem, and then they're going to go to their faith leader in rural Oklahoma. That's where they go. They're more likely to do nothing than to talk to a legal professional, by the way. Talk to a legal professional is 1%, and do nothing is 4%. So there you go. But you need to find, I think from our perspective, and Mary and I have talked about this, you need to find the Mary, the Reverend Hughes in your state, the person who's worked in emotional and spiritual care with your VOAD, the person who's really involved in the statewide faith organizations, who knows everyone, who can help connect you with all these different faith groups, like she's been able, to do for us. And I mean, she does it in other states. She worked nationally, so she's very good at it. But there's somebody in your state who can help you do this. And I'm happy to share all the materials I have, that anybody could make, pertinent for their own state, and talk to anybody about how we've been doing it. But the fact that you have faith leaders in Oklahoma who have like 195 contacts in their community every week talking to people. I mean, we've trained 309 ordained members of the clergy. 309 ordained members of the clergy times 195 contacts a week. That's a lot. I mean, they have a tremendous penetration into their community. So I just think it's a really very effective way to establish trust in all these communities. And people just haven't done it. And and again, if we hadn't stumbled into it, we wouldn't be either. I mean, it just kind of happened. So, but it's doable.
So it's very hard to nationalize projects like Beyond Opioids without funding, right? So to the extent that we could be helpful, we just give you a copy of our application, point you to where the sources are. So you need seed funding to do that. Another way, absent of that, through LSC, I suppose, one way to do it is through performance measures, to include the prioritization of substance uses, people with substance use disorder, and the services we've done would be another way, I think, to do it.
I would say insofar as nationalizing something, I think it would be helpful if we thought as a legal aid community a little bit more about building sort of transformative systems for the delivery of legal aid versus viewing ourselves as law firms. And if we really sort of reconceptualized what we were doing as legal aid lawyers as a delivery system for this product of legal aid, I think then it would transform, it would change us, we would start thinking about it differently and thinking about it and that change would make it easier to maintain the partnerships and share infrastructure instead of trying to build our own law firms in every community.
I think it's hard. I think you can nationalize the models and like the ideas of like hold Krista and each program up as being like, this is an example of how you can build these partnerships, but partnerships should be individualized. They should be community specific. So it's hard to nationalize that, but I do think you can give examples. Like no one thought about it until somebody did it. And then, someone hears Krista talking going, oh, that would work for my community. I have similar demographics. But I think showing models, but then procedure. How do you build partnerships in a way that's sustainable and collaborative and respectful? Because I think those are the tools, but really the partnership needs to reflect the community you're trying to serve, and that component of it can't be nationalized.
I think sharing the ideas at conferences and through grants. And I know there are after our Lawyer in the School program, there were other programs that reached out to us because they were applying for grants to fund Lawyer in the School programs. And the LSC staff is great about making those connections and continuing to fund that work. When the model works somewhere else, it might really work in a different community. It might look a little different. It might have to have a different, bent to it. But that infrastructure, what works, those lessons shared are so valuable. And LSC does a great job of making those connections, but continuing to foster that, I think would be wonderful.
That's a great way to end.